The stars overhead blinked in a slow retreat, swallowed by the growing light of dawn, and as the Nile exhaled its mist over the land, a peaceful rhythm returned to a civilization thousands of years old. Egypt was not just a kingdom of pharaohs and pyramids, it was a land of patterns, where nature and daily life moved like the steady flow of the river itself. The homes of the common folk, built from the same earth they walked upon, were modest but sufficient. Clay bricks, baked under the hot sun, formed the walls that kept out the desert wind and preserved the cool of the night. Families slept close together, not only for warmth, but for the quiet sense of security in each other's presence. Now, in the early light, old women tended to small altars within the house, whispering humble prayers to Toret, the goddess of childbirth and home protection. The carved figurines sat silently in their niches, hippopotamus-bodied, lion-limbed, crocodile-tailed, Deva-watchful. Prayers were not hurried, nor dramatic. They were like the wind, soft, constant, and barely noticed. Not far from the homes, farmers prepared for the day's labor. They examined the condition of the canals, dug during cooler months to carry Nile waters into fields. A son followed his father, stepping in his tracks, both figures draped in plain linen kilts. They carried sickles with flint blades, woven baskets, and expectations passed down by generations. But farming was not the only work to be done. In the village center, potters began turning their wheels slowly. The thick clay, drawn from the riverbanks, was molded with care. Round bowls, water jugs, and storage vessels took shape, destined for kitchens or local markets. Their surfaces would later be etched with symbols or left smooth and plain, reflecting the humble elegance of utility. Children played quietly nearby, often under the eye of a grandparent. They sculpted shapes from mud, or gently poked reeds into sand to create simple fences. Toys were few, but imagination plentiful. Sometimes, a small flute carved from bone could be heard playing a repetitive tune. It was a lullaby for the morning, echoed through a sleepy, waking world. Meanwhile, women continued their roles at home, kneading dough, sorting lentils, combing the hair of daughters, or weaving baskets with practiced grace. They spoke in low tones, sharing news of new births, neighbors' ailments, or stories heard from passing traders. These conversations were never rushed, nor loud, just soft threads in the larger tapestry of the day. As the sun climbed further, sacred rituals unfolded in the temples. Though hidden from the eyes of most, these early ceremonies held Egypt's heart together. High priests bathed statues of gods in scented water, offering incense, oil, and prayers. Bells chimed softly, barely heard outside temple walls. It was believed that such rituals kept balance in the universe between the gods above and the mortals below. Even if one never saw the inside of a temple, they felt its presence like a heartbeat beneath the soil. Back in the homes, midday drew near. The sun now cast sharp shadows across the village. Work paused, rest began. Mats were spread in shaded corners, heads reclined on folded arms. Meals were taken slowly, flatbreads with garlic or onions, dates picked fresh, and cucumbers soaked in water. Water itself was always stored in porous clay jars, which kept it cool through natural evaporation. And during this quiet pause, birds circled high above, casting gliding shadows on walls. The bray of a donkey echoed from afar. Dogs slept under carts. The air stood still, as if the entire land held its breath before the second half of the day resumed. In wealthier households, things moved differently, but not too quickly. Their homes, larger and better ventilated, had courtyards with painted walls and pools lined with lotus flowers. Servants carried food on trays, while children read aloud simple texts on limestone tablets. The scribes of Egypt were few but valued. They learned to write the ancient language hieroglyphs that told the stories of gods and kings. A young boy's fingers traced shapes on a sand-covered tablet, repeating the same prayer or tax decree over and over, until he could do it with eyes closed. In workshops beside the temples or city walls, craftsmen worked in near silence. A sculptor chiseled a small falcon from stone. A jeweler polished beads of turquoise. A leather worker dyed sandals in crushed berry pigment. These were not just workers, they were the artifacts they shaped might outlive them for centuries, but none of that rushed them. Their hands moved with purpose, not pressure. Back in the fields, the heat began to wane. Farmers, coated in dust, wiped sweat from brows and gathered what they had harvested. Dates, wheat, barley bundled and loaded onto donkeys. In the marshlands, reed cutters hauled thick bundles on their backs. Fishermen returned with netted tilapia, their scales glinting in the late sun. Life returned to the village in slow waves. Evening shadows lengthened once again. smoke curled from chimney holes. Bread was warmed anew, and pots of lentils or beans simmered on coals. Families reunited. Children showed what they'd made, perhaps a carved reed flute, or a small doll of clay. Women shared herbs with neighbors. Men exchanged wordless glances, nodding to mark another day survived, another sun welcomed and seen through. As the sky turned from gold to burnt orange, then gently settled into purples and deep indigos, life in the village took on a softer tone. The blazing sun no longer ruled the day. In its place, cool breezes drifted from the direction of the Nile, whispering through reed fences and ruffling the linen robes of those still moving about. Evening in ancient Egypt was not a time of rush or worry, it was a slow exhale, a downward glide into peace. Children, now tired from the day's play, returned to their homes. They brought small treasures, a shiny stone, a perfect reed, a feather from a passing ibis. These were shown to mothers or grandparents, who smiled with gentle pride before tucking them into corners of sleeping mats or beneath wooden bowls. These little trophies might mean nothing to the world, but they meant everything to the child who found them. Inside the homes, flames flickered in simple oil lamps. The oil pressed from radishes or sesame burned slowly, casting long shadows on the plastered walls. It was in these shadows that stories were told. A grandmother, her voice low and gravelly, began to speak. She didn't need a scroll or tablet, just memory. Her tale was of Anubis, the jackal-headed god of the dead, who weighed hearts on golden scales. A child listened, eyes heavy but wide, as the story unfolded like a soft lullaby woven from sand and stars. In another home, a father told his children about the time he saw a crocodile basking on the bank of the Nile, its back ridged like a row of baked loaves. He spoke slowly, repeating details, not to dramatize, but to extend the moment. Each word was like the slow drop of honey from a jar. Beyond the homes, in the more distant parts of the settlement, the river itself came alive with night sounds. Frogs croaked in rhythmic patterns, crickets chirped, the occasional splash signaled a fish surfacing or a hippo shifting its weight in the water. From far-off marshes, the cry of water birds echoed faintly. It was not loud, it was background music for a dreaming world. The stars now shimmered in full, revealing constellations familiar to the Egyptians, said Sir the Hunter. What we know as Orion rose from the eastern horizon. To them, it represented Osiris, god of the afterlife. Egyptians believed the souls of the dead sailed through the stars, just as they had once sailed the Nile. In the temple courtyards, night rituals commenced. Torches flickered along stone colonnades. Priests in white linen robes moved like ghosts through chambers, carrying incense and lotus petals. They anointed statues of gods with oil and offered bowls of figs and wine. These rituals were not rushed. Each gesture held centuries of repetition behind it. Every offering, every step, was a dialogue with eternity. Meanwhile, in the streets, dogs barked softly at shadows, cats sacred and slice-slipped through alleys, their eyes glowing like tiny moons. They were guardians of grain, chasers of pests, and companions of the divine. Some purred near doorways where people sat on woven mats, sipping warm beer or cool water before bed. Further upriver fishermen checked their boats. Nets were tied and left to dry. Oars leaned against the mud-brick walls of boathouses. A father and son might sleep in the same canoe where they worked, lulled by the slow rocking of the tide. Overhead, the Milky Way stretched like a silver ribbon. Some said it was the milk of Hathor, the sky goddess. Others said it was the path to the field of reeds, the Egyptian paradise. And even farther still, within the stone walls of noble houses, the evening unfolded in similar slowness. Musicians played harps and flutes. Scribes recorded the day's events, perhaps noting the measurement of floodwaters, or listing temple donations. In gardens, servants lit small fires to ward off insects, and the air smelled faintly of myrrh and fresh mint. Time was not counted in minutes here. It was measured in the sway of palm trees, the fading of colors in the sky, the soft creak of a wooden door. It was not a moment to be captured, but one to be felt, deeply and quietly. And then, sleep arrived not suddenly, but like a tide slowly overtaking the shore. One by one, lights dimmed. Conversations ceased. The world fell into whispers. A mother sang a final lullaby, her voice barely more than breath. A father placed his hand over his child's back, feeling the rise and fall of dreams. Somewhere far beyond, the jackals howled not in fear, but in ancient chorus, calling the moon to rise just a little higher. And in that moment, the entire land of Egypt, its farmers and pharaohs, its workers and priests, its children and elders all lay cradled beneath a ceiling of stars. protected by gods, wrapped in wind, and embraced by the same Nile that had rocked them to sleep for thousands of years. The day was done, and sleep, like the river, flowed without end. The wind had softened to a mere suggestion by midnight. The air was still, the kind of stillness that feels sacred, as if the entire desert had paused to listen. Within the quiet heart of the village, in a modest home nestled near the reed marshes, an old scribe named Nebu lay beneath a linen sheet, his eyes closed but mind still drifting. Not quite awake, not yet asleep. Nebu had written many scrolls in his time. His hands, once swift and precise, now moved slower, but carried even more wisdom. That night, his dreams were gentle ones. In his mind's eye he stood again in the great library at Heliopolis, its columns cool and wide. Papyrus scrolls rolled neatly in clay jars, the scent of ink still clinging to his fingertips. He dreamed of teaching a young apprentice to write the sacred signs, hieroglyphs that danced like birds, eyes, serpents, and suns. He remembered how the boy's brow furrowed in concentration, how the first wobbly attempt at writing the symbol for life had made Nebu smile. In dreams, there was no passing of time. He was young again, then old, then a child sitting beside his father beneath the stars. Elsewhere in the village, others slept too, each in their own world of dreams. The baker who had once offered Pharaoh's court sweet honey cakes dreamed of golden ovens, endless dates, and warm butter. A shepherd girl, cold beside her dog under a rough wool blanket, dreamed of white sheep scattered across a green oasis that stretched for miles. Dreams were sacred in ancient Egypt. They were not just wandering thoughts, they were messages from the gods, visitations from ancestors, or signs of what was to come. A priest might spend the morning interpreting the symbols of sleep, noting whether a falcon flying over water meant fortune or famine. The lines between dream and waking life were not strict. Everything was connected. The stars, the Nile, the body, the breath, all part of the same flowing rhythm. In the distance, a temple bell sounded softly, not loud or urgent, but low and drawn out, like the moan of time itself. It was a sound few noticed anymore. Only the jackals, prowling far from the firelight, turned their heads to listen. The bell marked the middle of the night when Ra, the sun god, traveled through the underworld in his golden boat. Egyptians believed that, in these hours, Ra battled Apophis, the serpent of chaos, to ensure the sun would rise again. Nebu stirred in his sleep. Sensing this sacred transition, his dream shifted. Now he was walking beside the river, but not the Nile. It was darker, colder, lit only by stars. He held a lantern, and the water beside him glowed faintly with blue light. In his dream, he was guiding someone, perhaps himself, through the Duat, the shadowy land of the dead. But there was no fear in him, only wonder. Back in the waking world, a breeze passed through the village, carrying the smell of wet earth and tamarisk leaves. It drifted through doorways and under the clay-tiled roofs, touching sleeping faces with cool fingers. A baby stirred, then sighed. A bird tucked its head deeper beneath its wing, and still, the stars turned above, slow and constant, as they had for thousands of years. Out in the fields, the statues of gods stood silently under the moonlight. One was of Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom, whose curved beak pointed toward the ground, as if always writing. Another showed Sekhmet, lion-headed and strong, watching over the people with fierce grace. These figures, carved from limestone and obsidian, seemed to breathe in the dark. In the candlelight of the dreaming mind, they moved, not violently but with purpose, as if stretching their limbs after centuries of stillness. In Nebu's dream, Thoth stepped down from his pedestal and handed him a scroll, not one of papyrus, but of wind and stars. Nebu opened it, and it made no sound. There were no words, only symbols, so simple, so ancient, they existed before speech. He traced them with his finger and smiled. He understood. The old scribe's breath deepened. His body remained still, but his heart felt lighter, as if unburdened of years. He was not afraid of death, for he had read the Book of the Dead many times, copied it line by line. He knew every spell, every plea, every invocation. But now, he felt something better than knowledge. He felt peace. Elsewhere, in the dark, the watchman leaned against the gatepost of the village. His torch had gone out, but he didn't mind. The night was clear, and he knew the rhythms of the place so well, he could navigate with his eyes closed. Occasionally, he'd hear the cry of a bird or the soft bray of a donkey. But mostly, it was quiet, the kind of quiet that wraps around you like a soft blanket, not empty, but full of presence. He sat down on a low stone wall and looked up. The stars shimmered above him, one blinked brighter than the rest. Sirius the dog, star beloved of the goddess, sopped it. Its rising marked the flooding of the Nile, the season of plenty. The watchman smiled faintly. It would come soon. It always did. Back in Nebu's home, the oil in the lamp finally ran out. The flame flickered, then vanished, leaving the room in soft darkness. But still, the old man dreamed, and the dream was not ending, it was only deepening. Somewhere in that dream, the Nile whispered, not in words, but in feeling. It told of cycles of birth, life, death, and return, of fish in the water, and farmers in the field, of stars in the sky and names carved in stone. Everything repeated, but nothing was exactly the same. That was the beauty of it. The night rolled on, the desert stayed cool, the stars above glimmered like promises, and beneath them, one village, in one moment in history, slept peacefully beneath the gaze of gods and the gentle hush of time itself. As twilight began to settle across the vast and rugged prehistoric valley, the world took on a different hue. Shadows lengthened. The sky, once a soft and endless blue, turned to streaks of rose, lavender, and fading gold. The tribe, now gathered back from their dispersed foraging and hunting, convened near the fire pit at the heart of the settlement. Here, the flickering flame became a beacon, both of light and warmth, drawing in every member of the close-knit group. The cave's mouth, dark and deep behind them, yawned like a sleeping animal, waiting to offer shelter once the night truly fell. The evening in a caveman's life was a time of quiet ritual, not necessarily in the ceremonial sense, as modern man might imagine, but in patterns that repeated daily. These rituals were stitched into the fabric of their routine with the precision of survival. Evening was when stories were shared, wounds tended, tools repaired, and plans murmured in low, crackling tones. Tending the fire was one of the most critical tasks. Fire was life. It offered protection from predators, warmth from the cold, and a place to cook food. Its maintenance was often entrusted to one of the older members of the group. Someone no longer strong enough to hunt, but still vital through their knowledge and presence. This elder would slowly feed the flames with dried brush and small logs, adjusting stones and coals with practiced hands. Sometimes, they would hum or mutter softly, keeping rhythm with the popping of the firewood. Children gathered around, their eyes reflecting the glow. Their day had been filled with learning, mostly through mimicry. They watched the adults closely, how they walked silently while tracking, how they picked berries without touching the poisonous ones, how they shaped stones into blades. But now, as the fire danced before them, they soaked in knowledge passed down through words and gestures. One of the elders might pick up a charred stick and draw shapes in the dirt, symbols, not quite writing, but understood by all. A spiral might mean the cave where bats slept. A zigzag could reference the path to the river. Evening meals, while simple, were moments of collective satisfaction. They might consist of roasted tubers, small game if caught, or occasionally larger portions shared from a successful hunt earlier in the week. Dried meat was common, soaked in water or cooked again to soften it. Everyone had their share, even the dogs or wolf dogs, rather really companions to humans who lingered at the edge of the circle. These animals were not yet domesticated in the way modern dogs are, but a relationship was forming. They served as guards, scavengers, and companions. The tribe fed them scraps, and in return, the animals gave warning barks or growls when danger approached. Language was limited but evolving. Grunts, gestures, and sounds formed a crude but functional communication system. Some tribes had begun to form basic proto-languages, a set of agreed sounds, meaning specific objects or actions. This allowed for slightly more complex planning. A sound for hunt, another for tomorrow, and perhaps a signal for a specific location. Combined, these could communicate intent and organize efforts. Evening became the time when such coordination occurred. Plans for the next day's activities were shared. Who would go out in which direction, who would stay behind with the children and elders, and whether a new source of water or food was needed. As night deepened, the sky above revealed a canopy of stars. No one knew what they were, not in the scientific sense, but their patterns were noted. A bright cluster might herald the start of a new season. A red point in the sky might serve as a rough calendar marker. These celestial signs guided migrations and seasonal expectations. There were those in the group again, often elders or the particularly observant, who tracked these lights and their movements. Sleep came gradually. There were no beds, not as we know them. Instead, piles of dried grass, furs, and animal skins served as mats. The cave provided some warmth and safety, its stone walls absorbing the day's heat and releasing it slowly through the night. People slept close together, not just for warmth, but for safety, and perhaps even comfort. The sense of being near others, of hearing their breathing, feeling their shifting, was grounding. Occasionally, the tribe would be awakened by a strange sound, a howl in the distance, the thump of heavy footsteps. In these moments, the group's awareness sharpened instantly. Spears would be gripped, fire stoked, brighter, children hushed, adults alert. Most of the time, the danger passed, nothing more than wind or distant movement, but they couldn't afford to ignore it. Dreams, though unrecorded, likely played a role in the way cavemen understood their world. Without written records or science, dreams may have felt like messages. A vivid dream might be taken as a sign or a warning. In the morning, some might share what they imagines of animals, floods, fire, or other phenomena. These retellings added to the shared mythology of the group. When dawn began to paint the horizon in pale orange and soft yellow, the camp stirred. Sleep was never long or deep light, and easily interrupted. The tribe rose as the light came. The first task, rekindle the fire if it had gone out, then begin preparations for the day. Children were taught through imitation. A child might follow their parent to the stream and try to copy how they scooped water using cupped leaves. Another might try to tie sinew around a stick, mimicking the creation of a simple spear. There were no formal lessons, but every moment was an opportunity to learn through doing. Certain members of the tribe held specific roles, not quite specialization as we know it, but tendencies. One woman might be particularly skilled at creating baskets from reeds. Another man might be able to knap flint with exceptional sharpness. These talents were respected and shared. The idea of property was communal. Tools and resources were used by whoever needed them. Occasionally, the tribe would encounter another group. These meetings could be tense. They might involve exchanges of food, tools, information, or conflicts. But often, there was cautious curiosity. Such encounters were opportunities to learn new techniques or news of far-off areas. Seasonal movement was a critical part of survival. The group could not stay in one place indefinitely. When game grew scarce or water sources dried up, the entire tribe would prepare to move. This was a slow, deliberate process. They packed what they could carry: tools, food, fire starters. Children were carried or guided. The old were supported. Migration routes often followed known landmarks: a split tree, a boulder shaped like a bird, a bend in the river. Over generations, these markers formed a kind of mental map, passed down by word and example. There were paths between the forests and the open plains, between summer grounds and winter shelters. These ancient routes would, in time, become the basis for future trade roads and tribal territories. Despite the challenges, the caveman's day was not just struggle. There was laughter, often sparked by the antics of children or shared jokes and gestures. There were moments of awe watching a herd of mammoths from a ridge, or standing silently as a storm rolled across the horizon. These were not mindless brutes, but observant, feeling humans, capable of contemplation, wonder, and joy. Their world was dangerous, but it was also beautiful. The smell of crushed herbs, the taste of fresh meat, the thrill of tracking an animal, the comfort of sitting beside someone you trusted, all were vivid experiences. Each day brought risk, but also the reward of survival, and the warmth of belonging. As this part of the story closes, the tribe once again settles near the fire, the sky darkening into the velvet of night. The stars blink slowly overhead, ancient witnesses to human persistence. In the quiet, a story begins again, spoken not in words but in the rhythm of life, in the patterns repeated through time. The caveman, though distant, was not so different from us, and so, as the embers crackle and the night wind stirs the leaves outside the cave, the tribe sleeps once more. Tomorrow awaits. As the quiet hum of prehistoric winds rolled across the open savannas and into the sheltered valleys where early humans lived, the pace of life remained slow, simple, and largely unchanged for thousands of years. In the early Paleolithic period, just after the discovery of controlled fire but well before the age of agriculture, the everyday routine of the caveman was steeped in rhythm with the land, the seasons, and the needs of survival. In this episode, we continue our slow, soothing journey into the daily lives of our ancient ancestors. Morning came not with alarms, but with light filtering through the crevices of caves or the rustle of animals stirring. For most early humans, the sun was the ultimate timekeeper. As the sky began to turn from deep purple to dusty orange, those living in primitive shelters, rock outcroppings, temporary huts, or even dense brush began to rise. There was no snooze button, only the innate response to warmth and changing light. Slowly, one by one, adults would stretch their limbs, crack stiff joints, and begin their day with little urgency, their movements deliberate and calculated. Children, if they were lucky enough to have survived the brutal early years of life, would often stir next. In some bands, they stayed close to their mothers or elder caretakers. The concept of family, while not defined by modern terms, was tightly interwoven with group survival. Bonds were not just emotional but practical. Protection, warmth, food, all were shared. Infants might be cradled in animal hides, nestled close to the warmth of their mother's body, while older children tagged along with adults, learning the slow rituals of survival. A crucial part of the morning was the inspection of tools. Flint blades, bone awls, and wooden spears were examined for wear. Some individuals in the group specialized intentionally or not in sharpening stones or fashioning new hunting implements. There was no formal division of labor, but tasks fell to those who showed aptitude or experience. Sitting in a circle, perhaps around the embers of the previous night's fire, they chipped away at stones, occasionally communicating with quiet gestures or simple grunts. Breakfast, as we know it today, didn't exist. Instead, the day often began with foraging. Berries, roots, edible leaves, anything easy to gather quickly were consumed. The act of chewing tough plant matter was slow and methodical. Hunting would come later, when strength returned and the sun rose higher. In some regions, shellfish or small game like lizards and rodents were common. A successful morning forage meant a temporary delay in the need to hunt. The middle of the day brought with it a rise in heat, and activity followed suit. Those deemed physically capable, usually young to middle-aged males and occasionally strong females, would prepare for hunting. Tools would be tied to makeshift belts or carried by hand. Painted faces, if culturally practiced, might be adorned with mud or crushed minerals. They moved in silence or hushed tones, aware that any sound could startle potential prey. Hunting was less of a chase and more of a wait. Ambush tactics were preferred over pursuit, camouflaging themselves in tall grasses or crouching behind rocks. They waited. The world was slow. Time passed in measured breaths. There was no sense of hastenly patience. A deer-like animal might appear on the edge of a clearing. A rabbit might rustle nearby. When the moment came, spears were thrown, nets dropped, or traps sprung. Success was a mixture of skill, luck, and the cooperation of group members. Those who remained behind during hunts, elders, injured, young, and nursing women had their own slow tasks. Watching over children was a full-time job, especially near rivers or dense forests where danger lurked. Elders shared stories, not for entertainment but for education. Around midday, a second round of foraging might occur, this time at a slightly greater distance. Mushrooms, if known to be safe, were a prized find. Tubers and nuts were dug up, sometimes boiled if fire was available. Once hunters returned, sometimes successful, sometimes not, the next communal task began. Preparing the catch. Skins were removed carefully with flint blades. Meat was cut into thin strips. Bones were set aside for tools, and organs were shared among the group. Raw meat, in some regions, was common. In others, a fire was built up and the slow roast began. There was little seasoning, perhaps wild herbs or salt from a nearby source. But the scent of roasting meat filled the air and signaled a brief reprieve from hunger. Evening crept in gently, the sun lowering behind the treetops or distant cliffs. Shadows grew long, and so did the communal fires. This was often the only time of the day when the group came fully together. Conversations remained minimal, not from lack of thought but due to the limitations of early language. Simple grunts, mimed gestures, and facial expressions conveyed enough. An elder might demonstrate a new tool, a young hunter might reenact a successful throw, or a mother might rock her baby as the group collectively settled in. Storytelling in the earliest sense was not just for entertainment, it was for memory, passing on the knowledge of where water could be found during droughts, which animals to avoid, and which plants cured or killed. These tales were critical. They were often wrapped in metaphor, expressed through crude drawings on cave walls or dances mimicking animal behavior. As darkness fully set in, the outside world became hostile, wild predators roamed, and visibility dropped to near nothing. Fires were stoked not just for warmth but for protection. Those with energy might sharpen tools by firelight, while others dozed off wrapped in furs. Children fell asleep nestled against caretakers, and the only sounds were the occasional crack of burning wood, a cough, or the howl of a distant predator. And yet, in all this slow-moving quietness, a rhythm persisted. The pace of life, defined by necessity and shaped by nature, lulled the body and mind into a kind of harmony with the world. Sleep came not from boredom, but from the body knowing it had done enough, survived another day, and could rest without regret. In the next segment, we'll explore the seasonal rhythms of prehistoric life, how early humans adapted their routines to harsh winters, scorching summers, and everything in between. But for now, rest easy in the knowledge that even tens of thousands of years ago, the world turned slowly, steadily, and ever so gently into the night. Imagine the soft flicker of firelight dancing across the stone walls of a cave. The evening has settled in, the tasks of the day are complete, and families gather, not around a television, but around the warmth of the fire. This moment is more than a way to ward off the chills, a time for connection, for sharing, and for passing down the stories that tether generations. In these quieter hours, the caveman's world slows even more. This is when the communal aspect of early human life truly shines. Children nestle close to their parents, elders speak in low rhythmic tones, perhaps recounting tales of great hunts or mysterious creatures that lived in the nearby forests. These stories might be part truth, part myth, but they serve a profound purpose: teaching, entertaining, and preserving culture. The voice of an elder, gravelly and deliberate, might carry a group into silence. Each word is a thread in a tapestry of knowledge. Young ears listen, not just for amusement, but for survival. The tales might include which berries to avoid, how to recognize animal tracks, or the warning signs of an incoming storm. These oral traditions are precursors to the libraries of our world today, packed with insight, warnings, and wonder. Beyond storytelling, these nighttime gatherings also invite the sharing of songs. Without musical instruments as we know them, rhythm would come from clapping hands, tapping stones, or humming simple, haunting melodies. These sounds echo softly against the cave's interior, forming a soundtrack for the flickering shadows. Occasionally, someone might mimic the sound of an animal, a bird, a wolf, or a bear, eliciting quiet laughter or perhaps awe. Such mimicry wasn't only for entertainment, it could serve as a teaching tool for hunting or for understanding the language of the wild that surrounded them. Sitting around the fire, people might groom one another, removing insects from hair or scratching hard-to-reach places. This grooming wasn't just hygienic, it was a bonding ritual. Much like how primates groom today, it created trust, eased stress, and affirmed relationships. The simplicity of these acts underscores a deep emotional intelligence in our ancestors. In a world with no written contracts or marriage certificates, gestures and touch conveyed loyalty, affection, and belonging. The fire itself, a marvel of early human innovation, required constant attention. Someone always had to feed it dry moss, twigs, branches. Letting it die was not an option. Fire was warmth, safety from predators, and the key to cooked food. Those who maintained the fire were not just practical caretakers, they were trusted keepers of a sacred force. With the day's hunting and gathering complete, the evening also provided a chance for reflection. A young boy might sit staring into the flames, imagining his first hunt. A mother might quietly feel the growing life within her belly, hoping for a healthy birth. An elder might gaze outward into the darkness beyond the cave entrance, remembering those who had gone before. Sleep came early in those days, governed not by clocks but by the natural rhythms of the earth. As the fire crackled and dimmed, people would curl up under furs or woven mats. The closeness of others offered not only emotional comfort but physical warmth. The concept of personal space was different, proximity was life. Dreams, then, might carry echoes of the day-rushing rivers, the chase of a deer, the cry of an owl. Perhaps dreams were even seen as messages from the spirit world, carrying warnings or blessings. Though we can't be sure, it's likely that early humans, like us, sometimes woke startled, sometimes slept peacefully, and sometimes drifted into restless half-sleep. But before all drifted off, there was silence, a shared, sacred silence. No chatter, no digital hum, just breath, the low purr of the fire, and the soft sounds of the night outside. Perhaps the rustle of wind in the trees, or the far-off howl of a wolf. This moment, this hush, was more than rest. It was the reset button of their world. The end of a day in which everything was done with intention, with effort, with necessity. There were no distractions, no empty motions. Everything served a purpose. In the morning, the slow rhythm would begin again. As the sun rises, light spills into the cave's entrance. A chill still lingers, but it's already fading. Some of the group stirs, stretching, yawning, murmuring. One of the children rolls over and clutches a scrap of fur tighter. Another rubs their eyes, blinking into the faint light. The day begins not with alarm clocks or emails, but with the biological call of the body and the first light of the earth's turning. There is a certain softness to the morning, a contrast to the more vigorous moments of the hunt or the midday heat. It's a time of renewal and quiet planning. Elders may rise first, checking the fire, stoking it gently, encouraging reluctant flames with practiced breath. Others begin to organize what few tools they possess: sharpened rock, a hide scraper, or a basket woven from reeds. A simple breakfast might follow. No menu, no coffee mugs. Perhaps a bit of dried meat left from the previous day, or tubers roasted in the coals. There may be a few berries gathered, not just for taste, but for sustenance. Every morsel is hard-earned and appreciated. Conversation, if any, is sparse and practical. Who will go out today to forage? Who stays behind with the children? Is it time to check traps set days earlier? Plans are made not with calendars, but with memory and instinct. Children, energetic now, begin to play. Their games mirror adult tasks, pretending to hunt, to climb, to cook. These are not idle distractions, but rehearsals for the life ahead. Through these games, they practice skills, test boundaries, and develop the physical endurance they'll need. The older members watch, sometimes offering gentle correction, but mostly letting nature and curiosity guide the learning. Play is vital. It's how humans have always experimented with the world. This daily life of the caveman, though seemingly simple, is a mosaic of tiny, purposeful acts. Each step, each choice, is made in the context of survival, community, and nature. There is no multitasking, no rushing, only presence. To an outsider looking in from our modern perspective, this world might seem slow, repetitive, even monotonous. But within its rhythm lies a peace that is elusive in our time. The harmony between the people and their surroundings, the awareness of the stars and seasons, the respect for fire and food, all these show that life was not about domination, but cooperation. They lived with the land, not against it. And though they feared much storms, wild animals, illness, they also knew joy. A successful hunt, a healthy child, a warm night. They sang, they touched, they dreamed, and every day they woke up and did it all again. The simplicity we call boring might be exactly the calm we now crave. As twilight melted into the inky silence of night, the caveman's world gently surrendered to shadows. The earth had warmed under the sun all day, and now the stones and soil radiated that heat back into the dusky air, creating a soft blanket of warmth beneath their bare feet. Around the flickering campfire, the tribe huddled, not just for heat but for something deeper, a sense of ancient belonging. The flames crackled low, casting long dancing shadows on the rock faces, like ghosts performing adult pantomimes. Smoke coiled lazily toward the open sky, and the scent of burnt embers mingled with damp moss and faint animal musk. Tonight's fire was special. It wasn't merely to cook or ward off predators. It was storytelling, night an unwritten ceremony passed down by instinct. No one carved it into stone or whispered it to newcomers. It simply happened when the stars aligned and the spirits of their ancestors felt close. The oldest among them, a woman with skin like dried bark and hair threaded with snow, leaned forward. Her name was Luma, and though time had weathered her bones, her voice held the strength of rivers. She began not with words but with breath, slow, deliberate inhalations, filling her lungs as though summoning voices from another realm. The tribe leaned in. Luma spoke of the great hunt, not one they had known, but a mythical hunt from before the rivers changed their paths, and before mountains had grown tired and crumbled. Her tale unraveled slowly, like bark peeling from a tree. She described the sacred elk, larger than 3 men, its antlers spread like the branches of an ancient tree. The hunter who pursued it, known only as Ka, walked for 7 sunsets, guided by dreams and the calls of birds that no longer flew in their sky. As Luma's tale wound on, the tribe's minds drifted not away in boredom, but deep into imagining. Each word painted caves in their minds, scenes etched on the soft underbellies of their eyelids. Some saw themselves as Ka, the lone hunter. Others imagined the mighty elk with eyes that spoke of knowing. The fire dimmed, the night deepened, but Luma's voice remained a tether between the seen and unseen. When she finally fell silent, no one moved for a while. Time had stretched. A hush hung in the air, sacred and unbroken. The youngest child of the group, barely able to stand on wobbly legs, let out a small, satisfied sigh that signaled it was time for rest. One by one, they laid their heads on gathered furs, their bodies forming a loose circle around the still glowing embers. Dreams would come easier now. The warmth of Luma's voice still echoed in their minds, and with it came a stillness, a safety not found in tools or spears, but in shared memory. Yet even as slumber took them, the night remained alive. The forest beyond their clearing whispered its own tales. Leaves rustled with unseen feet. Owls called from twisted branches, And somewhere far off, the distant howling of wolves formed a lullaby, both eerie and familiar. The people of the tribe didn't stir. Their dreams were stronger than fear tonight, held together by stories older than language. Luma sat awake longer than the rest, her eyes reflecting the final flickers of the fire. Her thoughts wandered to her own childhood, to nights like this, with a different voice telling tales. Back then, the stars had been brighter, or so it seemed. Her elders, now long gone, had filled her with stories of creation, of when the world was still soft, when humans were shadows crawling out of mud. She had believed those tales as she now believed in the warmth of this fire. Eventually Luma lay down, her bones creaking like dry wood. But even as her body rested, her spirit roamed the stories she had told. She knew that someday soon her voice would fade into the chorus of remembered whispers, but not yet, not tonight. As dawn approached, the embers gave their final glow. A soft wind stirred the ashes. One by one, the tribe began to stir, blinking into the gentle light of morning. The sun had not yet risen, but the horizon glowed with a promise. Stretching, yawning, rubbing sleep from their eyes, they reawakened into the world with the slow grace of creatures who understand the rhythms of the earth. The first to rise was the hunter car, who stood and looked toward the trees. His eyes scanned the woods not with urgency, but with reverence. He moved silently, muscles coiled, mind still half tethered to dreams. He picked up a spirit's tip, glistening with dew, walked toward the edge of the forest, not to hunt, but to greet the day. Behind him, others began their rituals. One woman used a stone shard to crush dried berries into a paste for children. Another man wove strips of bark into a net. A boy practiced throwing stones into a hollow log, laughing when he missed and more when he hit. Life was resuming not in chaos, but in the practiced dance of continuity. And so the cycle continued, the ancient rhythm of waking, surviving, resting, and dreaming. For the people of the fire, each night was a return to the womb of myth, and each morning a quiet birth into the known world. As the fire's last ember faded into darkness, a natural hush overtook the world. The sounds of chirping insects, rustling leaves, and distant howls dissolved into a tranquil silence, nature's own lullaby. Moonlight sifted gently through the trees, painting silver trails on the mossy ground. Most of the tribe had already drifted into sleep, their bodies curled into the cradle of earth and fur. But for a few, rest was still a visitor not yet arrived. Among the sleepless was a young boy named Tar, who sat quietly beside the cooling stones, his eyes still glowing with the echoes of Luma's tale. He wasn't afraid of the night. No, Ta was fascinated by it. The dark did not feel empty, it was alive, just different. In it he saw promise. It whispered secrets, just as the fire had shared stories. He watched how the trees swayed slowly, like ancient beings nodding to an invisible rhythm. Tar picked up a stick and gently drew shapes in the dirt spirals, suns, crude elk horns, and lines resembling waves. Though he had no name for them, he was making something akin to memory. These doodles were not meant to last, only to accompany his thoughts. Behind him, the faint snore of one of the hunters broke the quiet, reminding Ta that he was not alone, even in solitude. In the tree canopy above, an owl observed him, blinking slowly, as if recognizing a familiar soul. Its call deep, sonorous, and slow rolled through the woods like a soft drumbeat. Tar smiled. Somewhere, he imagined Kaa might have also heard such an owl on his fabled 7-day trek. Perhaps the owl was a messenger, a quiet guide. Eventually, sleep reached him. Tar curled up next to the fading warmth and let his breath slow to the rhythm of the night. In his dreams, the symbols he had drawn came alive. The elk leaped through shimmering forests. Waves crashed upon unknown shores. He saw himself walking beside Kaa, their footsteps silent against the stars. Morning came without a sound. The first rays didn't burst forth, but rather tiptoed into the clearing, brushing against the sleeping forms like a tender hand waking a loved one. The birds returned with melodies as delicate as dew. A mother stirred, pulling her child closer before rousing. One by one, the tribe awoke not with alarm, but with ease. Today would be a foraging day. The previous hunt had provided meat, but now they needed roots, berries, leaves, and bark. A small party prepared to depart. Their tools were simple, sharpened stones tied to sticks, woven baskets slung over shoulders, and most important of all, knowledge passed down by years of observation. Ina, one of the foragers, was a woman in her prime. Her senses were sharp, her hands quick, and her memory for plant life unmatched. She led the others with quiet confidence. Through trails invisible to outsiders, she navigated the undergrowth, reading the bends of branches, the tilt of leaves, and the freshness of scat. They passed under low-hanging vines and through cool streams, their bare feet adapting effortlessly. As they moved, Ina shared soft reminders, what leaf stung, what root healed, which berries were sweet and which bitter. Her voice was barely above a whisper, so as not to scare wildlife or disturb the spirits they believed lingered in certain groves. Occasionally, they stopped to collect mushrooms from tree trunks or dig for burrowing tubers beneath stones. The rhythm of foraging was meditative. Breathe, observe, pick, thank, breathe again. A silent mantra echoing through each movement. They never took too much from one place. Nature, they believed, was a generous mother if treated with care. Greed was punished not by beasts, but by the land going quiet, hiding its gifts. Midway through the day, they rested by a spring. Ina shared her pouch of dried berries and tree bark. As they ate, a child in the group Oa pointed toward the sky. A line of birds was flying in a perfect V migration season. It reminded the adults that the weather would turn soon. Preparations must begin not just for food, but for warmth and shelter. When they returned, the tribe greeted them with soft murmurs and nods. Meals were shared communally. Foraged finds were added to the cook's large pot, bubbling over stones. Children played with feathers, stones, and old bones games that mimicked adult roles, preparing them through imagination. Luma sat near the edge of the clearing, weaving thin branches into a small basket. She worked slowly, humming low and long. Her song was older than her, passed down without words. Some of the children gathered near, resting their heads on her lap or watching her fingers dance. As the sun slanted low once more, the tribe began their familiar evening rituals. Water was fetched, wood was stacked, the fire was relit. Tonight, however, there would be no stories. Tonight was for listening not to each other, but to the world. A hush fell over the camp. The wind spoke first, rustling tall grasses and trees. Then frogs joined in, croaking with solemn rhythm. Insects filled in the gaps with their persistent ticking. The stars began to appear, blinking open like ancient eyes. A gentle fog crept into the clearing, cool and slow. The tribe did not chase it away. It was part of the earth's breath. They wrapped themselves in furs and leaned against each other, not to speak, but to feel connected. Some stared into the fire's heart. Others watched the stars map their silent stories above. Ta, awake once more, traced shapes on his arm with his finger, pretending it was a tool marking stone. Perhaps, he wondered, someone would find these lines in a dream 1,000 seasons from now, and wonder who had made them. And somewhere, deep in the woods, an old elk lifted its head, sensing something in the air, perhaps the memory of a story told around firelight, echoing through the bones of the earth. Sleep came slowly but completely, draping the tribe in dreams as soft as moss and as deep as time. As the sun ascended behind the treetops, gentle beams of golden light filtered through the canopy, painting soft, dappled shadows on the forest floor. The earth seemed to breathe with the new day, its heartbeat slow and rhythmic, pulsing through the roots of trees and under the moss-covered stones. Birds stirred in the trees above, their songs meandering through the crisp air, not urgent but unhurried, as if savoring each note. The caveman too began to stir, not in haste, but with the same slow grace that governed nature's waking. Stretching their limbs and blinking against the morning light, they emerged from their fur-lined shelters one by one. Mornings were a time of gentle transition. The day's work would come, yes, but for now, there was a moment of stillness, breath shared among all living things. Some walked to the river, its waters glistening and cold, to splash their faces or fill woven vessels made from tree bark and sinew. The youngest among them chased shadows along the bank, delighting in the squish of mud between their toes. Elders sat in quiet contemplation, watching the steam rise from the water as the sun warmed its surface. Gathering food would follow, but it wasn't a rushed affair. It was an act of respect, a communion with the land. A pair of gatherers, one with a braid woven with feathers, the other with a walking stick shaped like a heroness' neck, moved through the undergrowth with practiced ease. They murmured soft thanks as they plucked berries and dug for roots, leaving behind small offerings, a tuft of fur, a carved stone, a whispered word. This was balance. Take only what you need, give something in return. Elsewhere, a small group prepared for a short hunt, not for grandeur or trophies, but for the hunters painted faint marks on their skin with ash and ochre, symbols to connect them with animals and ancestors. Their spears, hardened in fire, were tools of purpose, not violence. As they vanished into the trees, they blended not only with the shadows but with the intention of harmony. No trail was broken, no sound made without cause. Nature allowed them passage, because they walked with humility. Back at the central clearing, others began tending to small crafts. A woman stitched together a new pouch from strips of deer hide, her fingers moving in rhythmic patterns learned from her mother and grandmother. Beside her, a boy attempted to carve a fish onto a flat piece of bone. He pressed too hard, broke it, and looked up startled. The woman only smiled and handed him another, her eyes saying, "Try again." The smoke of the morning fire curled lazily into the sky, scented with mint leaves and dried fungi used to flavor the stew. They ate not in silence, but in soft conversation, laughter interwoven with old tales. There was no hierarchy at the mealtime circle. The old, the young, the strong, and the weak all sat level with one another. Here there was no concept of ownership or power. Knowledge, not dominance, shaped their roles. As midday approached, the sun hung high above, like a guardian eye, and the world seemed to hold its breath. The activities of the tribe slowed. Some lay down under trees, arms folded under their heads, eyes closed in rest or thought. The children played nearby, their game simple yet imaginative, chasing sunbeams, stacking stones, imitating animals. Their laughter didn't pierce the stillness. It danced with it. One elder, long of beard and soft of step, told the children about the stars even while the sun shone. "They're still there," he said, pointing upward, hiding behind the blue. He spoke of constellations, shaped like giant beasts, of stars that guided hunters and healers alike. His words were stories, but they were also maps guiding, not only through the forest, but through life. Near the edge of the clearing, a few sat in meditation. They watched the trees sway and listened to the wind rustle through the branches. To an outsider, it might seem like idleness, but to them, this was a sacred act. Listening to the land, to the stories carried by birds, to the creak of old trees sharing secrets. When the hunters returned, they brought a deer not too old, not too young. They whispered thanks over its body before carrying it home. There was no boasting, only reverence. The animal would feed many, its bones used for tools, its hide for warmth. Every part had purpose, and before they began the careful process of preparation, they sat quietly with the animal, offering it a moment of remembrance. As evening began its descent, the golden light softened into amber hues. Shadows lengthened again, stretching like sleepy giants across the earth. The fire was reignited, not with urgency but as a gentle ritual. Sparks flew upward like tiny stars returning to the sky. The scent of roasted meat and herbs filled the air, mingling with the smoke and dusk. After the meal, stories resumed, this time from the younger ones, tales of made-up creatures, dreams of flying, guesses about what lay beyond the mountains. The elders listened, not to correct but to encourage. Every story was a thread in the great tapestry of memory. Even the wildest fictions had their place. Luma, the old storyteller, spoke once more but only briefly tonight. She offered a song instead, low and humming, the kind that didn't need words. Her voice vibrated in the bones of those nearby, in the very soil beneath them. It was a song not to be understood, but to be felt. As night fully arrived, the cavemen did not retreat all at once. Some stared at the stars, counting them like old friends. Others traced symbols into the dirt, messages only they could understand, and a few simply sat in silence, arms around their knees, basking in the quiet company of their kin. Tonight would be calm. The dreams would be deep. The world, for all its wildness, was at peace. And so the tribe once more settled into rest, woven together by the threads of firelight, memory, and ancient belonging. As dawn painted the horizon with soft amber hues, the shadows of the cave receded into a warm embrace of morning light. A faint breeze rolled through the forest canopy, carrying the scent of damp bark and crushed foliage. Birds stirred gently, their coos and chirps weaving into a quiet, harmonious symphony. The world had not changed overnight, it had merely exhaled and reset. But within the sleeping minds of the tribe, something had shifted. The dreams, inspired by Luma's voice, lingered like a mist over their waking senses. Tomo, the young gatherer, stirred first. His eyes blinked slowly, taking in the familiar ceiling of stone above. He rose quietly, careful not to disturb the others still curled beneath their furs. His movements were a soft ritual, stretching each limb, brushing dust from his chest, testing the coolness of the morning air with the tips of his fingers. His ears tuned into the distant rustle of a wild pig, or perhaps just wind threading through brambles. The cave's threshold glowed with golden light. He stepped outside. The earth was dewy, soft underfoot. Tomo knelt, placing a hand on the ground as his father had taught him. He listened not with ears, but with his whole being to the earth's mood. A calm day. The plants would be full with night's moisture. The fruits might hang low and lazy, ready to be picked. His thoughts weren't words, but feelings, instincts rippling through ancient veins. Back inside, others began to stir. Luma's brittle fingers twitched as she awakened from her dreamscape, a subtle smile creasing her face. Perhaps she had visited the sacred elk again, or danced with ancestors whose names were too old to pronounce. The children yawned in a ripple of soft giggles and groggy murmurs, rubbing sleep from their eyes. There was no sudden rush, no horn to blow, no clock to chase. Mornings unfolded like a petal, deliberate, fragrant, natural. The women gathered near the fire's remains. A few embers still glowed under the ash. With practiced care, they coaxed flame back to life, feeding it bits of dried bark and grass. Smoke spiraled upward once again, a silent signal to the sky that life was moving forward. Meko, the tribe's flint napper, selected a fresh piece of stone from a woven pouch at his side. He turned it over in his palm, studying its angles like a painter studies a blank canvas. With careful strikes of a bone tool, he shaved shards from the edge, refining it into a knife. Each flake that fell revealed a sharper truth beneath. Crafting tools wasn't just survival, it was a form of meditation, an act of communion with the earth. Nearby Sala, the herbalist, sorted through a bundle of leaves and roots she had collected the day before. She crushed a few between her fingers, releasing their oils and scents. One leaf could soothe the cough, another dulled pain, yet another might help one fall asleep beneath a fretful moon. Her knowledge was silent but deep, passed down through gestures and plant touching, through observation and repetition. By midday, the cave's rhythm had fully awakened. Children splashed in a stream not far from the camp, their shrieks bouncing off rocks like bird calls. A pair of elders worked on weaving a fish trap from reeds, their fingers dancing with the patience of decades. The younger hunters inspected their spears, testing the sharpness of points and the balance of shafts. The tribe gathered again to share a midday meal, a simple mix of roasted roots, some berries, and thin slices of smoked fish from the river. They sat in a circle, not by hierarchy but by proximity and comfort. Sharing food was a sacred pause, an unspoken celebration of togetherness. After eating, the day softened into a reflective quiet. Some reclined against rocks, chewing on stalks or idly braiding grass. Others wandered the edges of the clearing, listening for signs of deer, checking for ripening mushrooms, or simply being. It was in these spaces, in between the survival tasks, that true connection bloomed. Old Koha, a man with eyes like river stones, began humming softly. It was a song without language, just melody rising and falling like wind over hills. One child echoed him with a giggle, another joined with a low hum. Within minutes, a dozen voices created a cavern of sound, not loud or showy, but rooted and communal. The melody filled the air, wrapping around trees, lifting toward clouds. In the midst of it, a gentle rain began to fall, tiny beads kissing skin and leaves alike. No one scattered, they embraced it. Water was life, and rain a gift. Some turned their faces upward, mouths open, drinking the sky. Others danced it with steps, but sways and turns, responding to rhythm not with thought but with feeling. As the rain subsided, a rainbow arched through the fading mist. The children chased its end, laughing at the illusion. The elders simply nodded, recognizing the sign. Balance was maintained. The world was, for now, at peace. Evening returned with a chill. Fires were lit again. Smells of roasting meat mingled with the earthy breath of wet soil. The stars blinked into view, tentative at first, then proudly. Luma prepared for another story, her eyes scanning the tribe with quiet affection. Tonight's tale would be of the Moon Eater, a creature from the north that stole light from the night sky until a child's laughter scared it away. But before she spoke, there was silence. A silence that was full, not empty. Full of breath, warmth, memory. This silence, this moment, was what the cavemen lived for. Not just hunting or fire starting or surviving, but being together, still deeply alive. Beneath the vast ceiling of stars, in the warmth of shared breath and firelight, their lives sang in a language older than words. As another day drifted into dusk, the tribe returned to their familiar circle, no words needed, just the slow, deliberate choreography of bodies at rest. The youngest nestled against the oldest. The middle-aged sat silently sharpening tools or braiding fibers into rope. But even in that quiet, something profound passed between them. A glance, a hum, a nod. These were not mere gestures. These were the unspoken verses of a language far older than syllables. Among the tribe was a boy named Tunok, whose hearing had never fully developed. Some believed the wind at his birth had whispered too loudly, sealing his ears. But Tunok knew something others didn't: how to feel sound through vibration. His world was not silented, was woven with trembling leaves, footfalls in soil, and the breath of wind passing through fir and stone. He often sat near the fire, not for warmth, but to feel the low rumble of voices in his chest. When someone laughed, he sensed it like a thump in his ribcage. When they cried, the stillness that followed was louder than anything else. His gift taught the tribe something they hadn't realized: they were always speaking, even when they made no sound. One evening, as the stars flickered awake in the ink-black sky, Tunok stood and began to mimic the motions of the day. With his hands, he showed the lifting of stones. With his shoulders, he became the crouching hunter. With his fingers, he mimicked the sparks of flint on dry bark. It was not mimicry-eyed, it was memory given form. And as the tribe watched, they understood something new. They had language all along. It lived in movement, in rhythm, in breath. From that night onward, silent performances became common. The tribe would gather, and one of them would rise and speak with their body. They acted out the wind's arrival, the birth of an animal, the path of the moon. Each gesture pulled others into its orbit, and soon these silent dancers became their most treasured form of storytelling. The echoes of ancestors at the edge of the known forest stood a solitary rock formation shaped like an open palm. The elders called it the hand of those before. No one remembered who first named it, but everyone respected its gravity. Once a season, the entire tribe walked in solemn procession to that place. It was their way of listening. They believed the rock stored echoes, laughter, weeping, footsteps, stories all etched into its stone by time. When they reached the formation, they placed their hands upon it, closed their eyes, and listened, not for sound, but for presence. Some claimed to feel the pressure of long-departed fingers on theirs. Others said warmth pulsed from the rock's center. This ritual was not about answers, it was about remembering. About humbling oneself before the mystery of how many feet had walked these same paths. How many eyes had scanned the stars. How many hearts had feared the dark but walked into it anyway. Children were told that every touch left an imprint. Not a mark visible to the eye, but something the stone could feel, something it would keep. This belief created a continuity that bound them beyond their years. You were not alone, they were told. You never had been. Rain, reverence, and rebirth. The rains came without warning, as they often did. The tribe didn't curse it or run. They had lived enough seasons to understand rain was both disruption and deliverance. Each drop was received like a blessing. The parched earth drank greedily. The air, once dense with dust, turned into a balm for the lungs. Children ran naked beneath the downpour, arms outstretched, mouths open, squealing as they were soaked through. Elders tilted their faces skyward, letting the water cleanse more than skin it, washed away worry. Rain meant pause. Fires hissed and died. Tools were set aside. They took shelter under overhangs and thick hides, listening as the forest around them came alive. Frogs called to one another, leaves sighed, buried seeds stirred. During such rains, they did not speak much. The rhythm of droplets was a conversation too. They watched the patterns forming in the soil. They traced the beads on each other's skin. A slow reverence took hold. It wasn't tea prayer in the way we know it, but an acknowledgement that the world moved without their control, and that this movement was a kind of music. Later, when the sky cleared and the mist lifted, the tribe emerged, blinking like newborns. They moved slower, more softly. The world had been remade again, the old songs in new voices. Each season brought new faces and fonts wrapped in bark cloth, born into a world both simple and infinitely complex. Their cries were the same as those who came before them, but their lives would hold slightly different rhythms. The tribe didn't believe in ownership, not of land, not of ideas, not even of tradition. So, every new child was seen as a possible teacher, not just a learner. One such child, Yori, began humming before she could walk. It wasn't mimicry. She hummed tunes no one had heard before. Her mother said the birds taught her. Others said she remembered songs from before she was born. The elders didn't stop her, they listened. And in time, they began to hum with her. These tunes, soft, round, and slow, began to merge with the older chants. The fusion became a new form of oral tapestry. They called it threading. One voice started, another followed, echoing or twisting the line. It wasn't harmony in a musical sense, but a weaving of breath and presence. At night, the forest echoed with their threads. They sang not to be heard by others, but to remind themselves they were still there, alive, aware, and connected. As the moon waned behind shrouds of silvered clouds, the distant hoot of an owl signaled the heart of the night had arrived. Among the sleeping tribe, only the fire still held memory of the day, its glowing embers pulsing like the soft rhythm of breath. Sparks, tiny stars born of earthbound flame, drifted upward into the vast blackness, disappearing one by one into the cosmos above. These quiet sparks seemed to mimic the lingering thoughts in the caveman's minds and spoken dreams, half-finished memories, and the ungraspable threads of an ancient knowing, nestled within a shallow dip in the ground. The oldest stones, the ones the elders believed to carry memory, lay still and cool, their surfaces smooth from countless seasons of weather and touch. One such stone, affectionately named Aru by Loma, sat closest to the fire. It had once marked the resting place of a revered ancestor, and now it was a symbol of protection, wisdom, and quiet strength. Tonight, as sleep brushed over the tribe-like falling ash, one figure stirred from the circle. Rune, the adolescent hunter. Rune's eyes fluttered open, not from noise or fear, but from something deeper, a quiet nudge from the spirit of the night itself. He sat up slowly, rubbing warmth into his arms, then stood barefoot on the soft soil. The warmth of the fire behind him offered comfort, but something ahead called him with hesitant steps. He approached Aru, placing both hands gently on the stone surface. In his family, touching Aru during sleep hours was rare and almost sacred. Not forbidden, but considered meaningful, something done when the soul needed clarity. Rune closed his eyes and listened. He expected silence, but silence itself spoke volumes. The wind whispered through the tall grasses, insects hummed their tiny symphonies, and the earth, warm and breathing beneath his toes, offered steady reassurance. Rune did not know what he was searching for, yet he stayed. He thought of the elk in Luma's tale, of Ka who wandered without a map, trusting only dreams. Rune wanted to understand what it meant to feel guided not by sight or command, but by something unseen. He whispered softly, not to the air, but to the stone. "What would you have me see?" There was no immediate reply, but his breathing slowed. His thoughts settled, and in that stillness came images, not visions. Exactly, but remembered feelings. The weight of a successful hunt, the joy of sharing food, the ache of loneliness, the pride in finding the river's new bend. He was not imagining these things, he was remembering them, though they were not his memories. Time in this place was circular, not straight. The stone remembered all who had come before, and in that memory, Rune felt held. Eventually he lay down beside Aru, the stone now warm from his touch. Sleep came easily. At first light, Rune awoke to find Luma already tending the fire. Her glance told him she had noticed. She said nothing, neither did he, but a small, knowing smile crept across her wrinkled lips, and he nodded once in return. The tribe began to stir. Light filtered in orange threads through the canopy above. The morning was slow and silent, honoring the sacred night before. There were no loud greetings, only gentle grunts, slow stretches, and the occasional shared glance that spoke of dreams remembered. As was their routine, the older members prepared for the water gathering, a practice vital to their survival. 2 members, Bear and Emo, walked the eastern trail, vessels slung over their backs, while others organized tools for the day's tasks: wood gathering, fish trapping, and fruit foraging. Meanwhile, Rune accompanied the child Pucker to the grove where medicinal herbs grew. Pucker had been bitten by a small lizard the day before, and though the wound was minor, Luma insisted on using the leaf of the white-rooted Yuma plant to cleanse it. Rune didn't speak much, but Pucker didn't mind. The child enjoyed the gentle rustle of plants and the soft squish of damp earth underfoot. As Rune plucked the pale green Yuma leaves, he remembered Luma's instructions. Only 3 leaves, and never from the same plant. The plant has its own spirit, she had said. Take more than you need, and the spirit leaves it. Back at the shelter, Luma mashed the leaves and applied them gently to Parker's leg. She hummed softly, a lullaby with no words. The child smiled through the sting. The afternoon sun bore down steadily. This was the time of stillness, when work paused and the shade was revered. The tribe retreated beneath broad leaves or into shaded caves, their movements languid. Heat was not their enemy, it was part of their rhythm, a signal to rest. During this pause, Gore, the stone painter, picked up a flat slab in his collection of colored clays. He mixed them with water and spit, creating the hues he desired. Today he painted a spiral, a symbol of journeys inward. It was not for display, but for release. He believed that painting unspoken feelings gave the heart room to breathe. Beside him, young May watched, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Why the spiral?" she asked. Gore paused, the tip of his brush suspended. "Because sometimes the longest journey is the one that never leaves the ground," he said. May did not understand completely, but she remembered the words. In another shaded alcove, 2 sisters, Shaw and Vey, braided reeds into a net. Their fingers moved quickly and rhythmically, Not from rush, but from shared memory. Their mother had taught them, and her mother before her. The net would be used tomorrow to trap riverfish, but for now, the act of weaving was as important as the tool itself. Each knot was a stitch in time, a connection to the past. Farther away, Luma sat with a handful of children. She was not telling a story today. Instead, she asked questions. What do you think the stars eat when they are hungry? One child answered, moonlight. Another guessed, clouds. Luma nodded at both. Maybe they eat our dreams, too. The good ones. That's why we feel lighter when we wake. The children giggled, then grew silent, thinking. Evening arrived slowly, casting soft amber across the land. Shadows grew long and gentle, draping over logs and stones like sleepy arms. The tribe gathered once more near the fire. No feast tonight, just a sharing of small finds. Berries, roasted insects, a single fish caught by sheer luck. Rune spoke for the first time that day. I dreamed of the elk, he said quietly. All turned to him. Luma raised her chin slightly. And what did it say? Rune hesitated. It looked at me. That was enough. The fire crackled in reply. As the sky darkened, the tribe began to hum not a song, exactly, but a low communal sound, like the voice of the forest. It had no beginning, no end. It simply was. It wrapped around them like smoke, carrying their memories upward to mingle with stars. Luma placed her hand on a rouge stone. Her voice was soft, almost inaudible. We remember, and we are remembered. Rune touched the stone beside hers. His fingers traced its edges. Sleep came once more, not with silence, but with harmony. And in that harmony, even the stones seemed to dream. The fire had become little more than a warm glow, reduced to a bed of pulsing embers nestled in the heart of the stone circle. Tiny tongues of flame occasionally flicked into the air, only to vanish in a blink, like the final thoughts before sleep claims the mind. Around this fading light, the tribe lay still, wrapped in furs and silence, save for the occasional shift of limbs or the rustling of dried grass. But tonight would be different. Tonight the silence would not last. Above them, the sky rolled with thick clouds, blotting out the stars that had watched over their dreams for generations. A strange wind stirred the treetops, distant but growing closer, like the breath of some ancient god exhaling upon the world. Luma, who had spun the tale of Ka and the great hunt, stirred from her light slumber. Her eyes opened slowly, and in them was not sleep, but knowing. The kind of knowing passed, not through voice or touch, but through lifetimes. She rose quietly, careful not to disturb the others, and stepped barefoot onto the cool earth. The night air clung to her like a memory, moist, earthy, and filled with a weight she couldn't yet name. From her waist, she unwrapped a thin strip of hide, worn and darkened with time. Inside it was a smooth stone, veined with red and brown. She held it to her forehead, closed her eyes, and breathed. The ground gave a faint shudder beneath her feet. Back inside the cave, young Akon tossed in his sleep. His dreams had turned from the elk and the mighty hunter to something darker, a vast field of bones. A hollow wind whispering secrets he couldn't understand. He jolted upright, heart pounding. The fire was nearly out. He looked around and found Luma missing. Luma, he whispered, but the night only echoed his fear. Outside, Luma stood still as stone. From beyond the ridge came a low, rhythmic sound like stones grinding together, or the footfalls of something impossibly large. Her eyes flicked upward. For a brief moment, the clouds parted and revealed a red moon, swollen and unnatural. She had seen it once before, when she was a child, no older than Akon that night. The old shaman had vanished, and the river changed its course. Inside, the others began to stir, not from the sound, but from the change. Something in the air was different, now thicker, heavier. Mothers clutched their children instinctively. Hunters reached for their spears. No one spoke. Their bodies remembered what their minds could not. The stories buried deeper than bones. From before the tribe had a name, Luma returned, her face grave but composed. She placed the stone on a ledge above the fire and knelt. The long night has begun, she said quietly. We must remember the deep stories. No one asked what she meant. They only gathered close, as children do when thunder rumbles in the distance. She began again, not a tale of elk or forest, but of the sky before the stars, of the first fire that had no spark, and the beast that swallowed light. Her words were slower than before, her voice thick with warning. Each syllable fell like a drumbeat, binding the tribe to something ancient and unspoken. Hours passed, but no one slept. The wind outside howled louder now, rising and falling like a wounded creature. The trees groaned. The earth, usually a constant companion, felt restless. And still Luma spoke. She told them of Naru, the cave beneath all caves, where light could not follow and time forgot to pass. She told them of the pale ones, figures that lived between moments and shadows, feeding on memory and silence. She told them of the cooler, deep vibration that summoned them, when the balance of the world tipped too far. As she spoke, the fire flickered to life again, though no one had added wood. It burned with a strange hue, more golden than orange, as if the stories themselves were kindling. Akon felt something inside him shift. The fear that had clung to his chest now hummed with recognition. The dream bones and whispers was not a nightmare. It was a message. He reached into the ashes and pulled out a smooth, round stone he had never seen before. It was warm, almost pulsing. Luma noticed and gave a small nod. "You are the rememberer now," she said simply. And so Akon took his place beside her, eyes wide and lips parted, catching every word. The night dragged on, but none wished for dawn. The fire became their anchor, the stories their compass. Luma spoke of the day the sun disappeared for 3 whole sleeps, and of the strange rains that turned to dust before touching ground. She spoke of Yemu, the stargazer, who climbed the mountain and came down with silver eyes. In between tales, they sat in silence, not out of fatigue, but reverence. Children, even the smallest, stayed alert. The world outside was no longer theirs. Only here, in this small ring of warmth and shared memory, did life remain whole. The moon vanished behind clouds again, and the fire's light grew softer, deeper. Luma's voice began to slow, not from age or sleep, but because the final tale approached, one only told once in a generation. She beckoned Akon forward and placed the old stone in his hand. "Speak the last one," she whispered. He looked at her, uncertain. "You've heard it in your bones," she said, and he closed his eyes and began to speak. The tribe leaned in, his voice trembled, but only at first. Then it found rhythm, then power. He spoke of the great mirror sky, of the first wanderers who had no shadow, and the flame that hid. The words poured from him like a stream long held back by stone. When he finished, dawn had begun to pale the edges of the horizon. The wind had stilled. The fire, for the first time all night, burned in silence. And then, as one, the tribe breathed, a single exhale, as though they had been holding their breath for centuries. Luma touched Akon's shoulder and smiled. "The long night has passed." They emerged from the cave into the newborn light. The world was changed, but so were they. They had remembered, and in that remembering they had survived. Beneath a sky freckled with stars, where the moon seemed to hang low and heavy like a guardian watching over a forgotten world. The quiet breath of the earth exhaled through the rustling of tall grasses, swaying gently in rhythm with the wind. Hush, and within this slow-moving night, a single flicker of orange, nestled into the crook of a stony hill, faint and small yet pulsing with life. This campfire, half buried in a ring of soot-stained stones, sent flickering light onto the broad faces and silent eyes of a dozen figures who sat in motionless contemplation. Their silhouettes cut sharply against the backdrop of ancient boulders that bore the scars of ages and the etchings of hands long returned to dust. They sat like sentinels of memory, each one wrapped in layers of animal hide still smelling faintly of the forest and the chase. The fibers stiff from blood and rain, while their breath rose in thin clouds to join the low-hanging fog that crept along the valley. Floor like a curious spirit looking for a story to inhabit. Time passed without fanfare, and none among them spoke for speech, was reserved for necessity and ritual, and this moment, bathed in warmth and moonlight, was meant for the kind of silence that speaks in pulses, heartbeats, and the slow shifting of the soul. The children had long ago curled beside their mothers, tucked under the furred bellies of hounds bred more for companionship than for war. And their dreams, though unseen, fluttered across their slack faces like moths drawn to something older than fire. In the periphery, the old man moved, a whisper of motion as he reached for a flat stone from the pile. Beside him, and without a word, he placed it gently on the coals, its blackened surface bearing the faint residue of previous stories, cooked not in words but in gestures, glances, and the breaking of shared bread. He held in his hands a root gnawed and twisted like the fingers of time itself, and with the solemnity of a priest. He shaved it with a sharpened bone shard each curl, falling into the pot that now steamed faintly with the smell of herbs, smoke, and the secret memories of the earth. Above them the sky deepened to ink and stars blinked more slowly, as if even they were being lulled by the lullaby of crackling wood, settling ash, and the nearly imperceptible hum that passed between each person seated by the fire like a ghost threading through ribs. One of the women, her hair braided with beads of amber and shells from a river that had anti-flowed in generations, raised her eyes to the trees and blinked slowly, not in surprise or alertness, but in the kind of communion one feels when they know the forest is watching and that the forest remembers. As the mist continued to roll gently over the damp, earthy terrain like the breath of the slumbering forest, itself a quiet hush wrapped around the camp's edge, where a solitary figure moved with the deliberation of thought rather than urgency, stepping over moss-coated stones and the winding roots of gnarled trees that had stood as silent sentinels for generations, their limbs groaning under the weight of memory. The rhythm of the forest slowed to match the pulse of this lone wanderer, a middle-aged caveman named Thok, whose deep-set eyes carried the shadows of hunts long past and the glimmer of questions that had yet to be voiced. He was not a leader, not a shaman, not even a skilled hunter, but he possessed the kind of quiet awareness that others respected, the stillness of someone who listened more than he spoke and observed more than he judged. With each footfall, the squish of damp soil and the faint crackle of brittle leaves underfoot told stories of those who had walked this same trail like foxes. Even other tribes yet Rathak did not fear these signs. Instead, he welcomed them like echoes of distant cousins, who though unseen still danced the same ancient rhythm. He carried with him no tools save a palm-sized stone, smooth and black, a gift from his daughter who had found it near the river and believed it to be shaped like the moon in her dreams. And as he walked, he rubbed his thumb across it, again and again, as though drawing something unseen into his skin. Rothak's journey was not far in distance, but far in spirit, for his destination was a ledge of stone known to his people only as the Whispering Shelf, a place high above the canopy where wind rushed and sang without words, a sound older than even the oldest among them, and it was here that he sought not answers but clarity. When he arrived, the climb having pulled breath from his chest and sweat from his brow, he stood in silence, letting the views stretch before him, a horizon of rolling green and grey, of treetops swaying in skies, shifting a canvas that had never once been finished and never would be. He sat on the ledge and closed his eyes, letting his other senses take over. The rush of air against his cheeks, the tremble of stone beneath him, the scent of dew and bark, and the faintest trace of charcoal smoke from the camp far below. And there, wrapped in the sky, he began to hum. Not a melody he had heard, nor one he had crafted, but something that arose from his chest, like breath made audible. And as he hummed, he imagined he could hear others' voices carried on the wind, fragments of ancestors who had once sat where he now sat, humming into the same air, pondering the same uncertainties. This moment was not dramatic nor storied. It was the pause between heartbeats, the space between thoughts, the kind of stillness that could only exist when the world allowed itself to be quiet. And in this, Thok found what he didn't know he was seeking. Not a vision or a dream or a prophecy, but the reassurance that even in the vast mystery of time and wilderness, he was not alone. As he rose to leave, the stone still warm in his hand, he didn't look back, for nothing behind him needed changing, and everything ahead would be met in the same way, with breath, with thought, with care. The walk back was slower, not from fatigue, but from fullness, as though each step was savoring the weight of the moment that had passed. And by the time he returned to the camp, dusk had deepened. Fires were stoked and Luma's voice once again whispered old songs to the children who, with heavy eyelids and open minds, curled into one another like leaves on the forest floor. And Rothek, without a word, settled into his place beside the fire, his presence acknowledged, not with nods or greetings, but with a simple shifting of bodies making room, as though the circle had always known he would return just in time for dreaming. As the morning mist clung low to the earth, coiling gently around the ankles of early risers and cloaking the landscape in a veil of quiet promise, the caveman stirred from their resting circles slowly and deliberately, each breath rising in a visible puff against the cool air, while the embers from last night's storytelling fire glowed faintly like distant stars. Preparing to vanish, one by one they stretched their limbs with the unhurried grace of creatures who lived not by the hour, but by instinct and rhythm, rubbing their eyes against the pale blue dawn as birds hidden within the treetops began to call out in staccato bursts that bounced lightly off stone and bark. The elder Luma remained seated on her woven mat of dried reeds and animal sinew, her eyes half closed but awake, her body unmoving except for the gentle tapping of her fingers on her knee, a rhythmic beat that matched the pulse of the earth itself and seemed to summon the tribe into silent acknowledgement of another day's beginning. Children with tangled hair and mud-smeared faces emerged from their bundles of furs and nestled beside each other like pups from the same litter, blinking and smiling and pointing to the wisps of cloud that drifted lazily above them, inventing names for shapes and laughing softly without language as adults rose to tend to morning duties. As the stars wheeled ever so slowly overhead, casting their ancient gaze upon the sleeping figures nestled in the cradle of the earth, the wind whispered through the treetops with a hush that sounded like a forgotten lullaby. and the embers of the fire now no more than glowing eyes in the dark pulsed with a quiet rhythm, as if keeping time with the dreams of those slumbering near its warmth, while unseen creatures stirred and paused on the outskirts of the tribe's camp, their instincts tempered by the ghostly scent of smoke and the distant memory of danger. And in that velvet silence of pre-dawn, when the shadows seem the thickest and time itself appears reluctant to move forward, one of the young hunters, whose mind was often caught somewhere between the old stories and the new day, stirred under his fur wrap and sat upright, his gaze meeting the stars as if asking them questions he could not yet voice, while his breath left small clouds in the chilled air, and the quiet night seemed to bend its ear toward him, curious about what he might do next. Oru's feet found the ground softly, the earth cool but not unkind beneath them, and he stood slowly, careful not to wake the others, his eyes adjusting to the muted light that came not from the moon but from the glistening dew on leaves and the faint outlines of stone and bones surrounding their camp. And he stepped past the ashes of the fire as though crossing a threshold between dream and waking, guided not by urgency but by the pull of something just beyond the reach of thought. He moved toward the ridge, where the trees thinned and the wind often carried distant sounds like music or language. And as he climbed, his hand grazed the rough bark of old trees, his fingers feeling the deep grooves as if reading a script written long ago by the hands of nature herself, while his ears remained tuned to every crack, rustle, and whisper that the forest dared to make during its deepest hours of rest. When he reached the top, Oru crouched beside a familiar rock shaped like the back of a resting animal, and from there he could see the great stretch of land below, rivers like silver snakes, the gentle swell of hills, and the dark mass of the forest that seemed to breathe beneath a blanket of mist. And it struck him that in this moment he was both infinitely small and deeply necessary, a single thought in the mind of the world, but one that carried weight nonetheless. Behind him the camp remained still, the others lost in dreams sparked by stories and soothed by warmth, while Oru remained poised, a silent watcher of his people and the stars. And slowly his thoughts wandered to Luma's tale, the great elk, the long journey, the voice that had summoned Kand. He wondered if the dreams of the past were not just memories but invitations. The first light of dawn did not arrive with fanfare, but with a subtle shift. The blue of the sky deepened and softened at once, and the stars began to vanish one by one like candles snuffed by a careful hand, while the horizon stretched and yawned, revealing a hint of warmth that promised new shapes, new sounds, and the slow unwinding of another day in the timeless rhythm of the earth's breath. Oru stood again, his legs strong beneath him despite the cold, and began the walk back to camp with a sense that something had changed, not in the world around him, but in the space within his chest where the fire of purpose and wonder had begun to stir. Fed by the silent communion with stars and the weight of 1,000 stories sleeping just beneath the skin of things, as he descended the slope, the first bird sang a tentative, lonely note that sounded like a question, and Oru responded not with words, but with a slow nod and a smile that curved like the moon's last sliver, knowing that whatever the day held, it would begin as they all did, with rising light, moving feet, and hearts tethered to the pulse of an ancient world that never truly slept. The camp began to stir soon after Oru's return, the gentle rustling of bodies shaking off slumber echoing like the forest waking up. And the mothers were the first to rise, checking their young, adjusting wrappings, their hands moving with a practiced tenderness that spoke of lifetimes of care passed down through hands and hearts alike, while soft murmurs drifted through the air like smoke, marking the transition from dreaming to doing. One of the men, Gale, rubbed his eyes with the back of his wrist, and looked at the sky, his face unreadable save for the twitch of familiarity that comes with witnessing the same sky shift 1,000 times. And he reached for his walking stick, fashioned from twisted wood and carved with tiny notches for reasons he'd never spoken, and began his slow circle around the camp to check for tracks, scents, or signs from the night. Children woke in 2s and 3s, stretching like small animals and blinking at the light, now touching the tops of the trees, their yawns wide and mouths dry from sleep, and a few giggled at dreams half remembered, while others reached instinctively for familiar hands or soft fur, clinging to the safety of what was known before the full weight of the day settled into their bones. Luma, still wrapped in her layered skins, sat quietly with her eyes closed, her breath steady and deep, but those nearest her knew she was not asleep. She was listening, not just to the camp but to something else, something beyond, as if her ears could catch the footfalls of time itself, walking slowly through the moments just before sunrise, and her lips moved ever so slightly, whispering words that might have been names or prayers, or perhaps just the memory of wind, And so the tribe prepared for the day, not with a rush or a noise, but with the slow assembling of tasks and rhythms, gathering water from the stream, checking snares set along the forest's edge, tending to tools made from flint and bone, each motion part of a larger dance, choreographed by necessity and passed from elder to child like a song too sacred to be spoken aloud. The day ahead would be like others, and yet unlike any before it. For each sunrise carried with it the chance that something would shift, a tree fallen where once stood, new tracks etched into the mud, a shadow glimpsed where no creature had walked, and so they moved not in fear but in deep attention, every sense attuned to the drumbeat of the world around them, trusting that whatever came, they would meet it together beneath the sky that had watched them since the beginning. As the rhythm of the forest deepened and the breadth of the earth slowed beneath the blanket of night, the caveman tribe lay nestled in a cocoon of silence, each heartbeat syncing with the distant rustle of leaves, stirred by an unseen breeze that drifted like a forgotten memory across the canopy, its gentle whisper threading through branches and slipping into the sleeping ears of those curled around the dying warmth of the fire. This was not mere rest, it was communion with something older than time, a shared descent into a realm where waking and dreaming merged in a twilight tapestry of sensation, echo, and myth. In this hush, the elders' minds wandered far beyond the moment, tracing invisible trails across generations of lived memory, their thoughts painting ancestral hunts and ancient migrations like murals upon the inside of their eyelids. Stories not told with words, but felt in the marrow about times when their people walked beside beasts, now only bones. When skies shifted without warning and rivers flowed backward as though to reverse time itself. And in this suspended space, knowledge passed, not through speech but through silence, through the subtle shifts in breath and posture and the way one's body responded to the rhythm of the fire and the cool breath of the earth's dreaming. The fire, though dimmed, still held life within its belly embers, pulsing like the heartbeats of tiny spirits, casting a faint flickering light upon the stone walls of the cave, those walls now marked with soot and ochre, telling stories and symbols that danced in the shadows and spoke of creatures with wingspans wider than trees and men with faces like storms, who wrestled thunder from the sky and gifted it to the earth in moments of divine rage or blessing. And the youngest child, stirring in sleep, twitched as though chasing one of those beings through the forest of his dreams, the flick of his fingers echoing some ancient gesture lost to time. In this quiet, Luma sat awake, eyes reflecting the dying firelight, her hands resting upon her knees, fingers slowly moving as if tracing invisible lines in the air, lines of power and memory, of loss and learning, her body swaying gently in time with a song only she could hear, a song that had followed her since childhood, passed to her by a grandmother whose bones now lay in a hidden grove, marked only by a cairn of river stones stacked with intention and prayer, each stone a memory, each placement a vow to carry the story forward, never letting the thread snap even if the world forgot what it once meant to listen. Outside, the night creatures had emerged, soft-footed beasts with eyes like lanterns, their presence a flicker on the edge of awareness, and the wind now carried scents from far away, moss and pine, decay and birth, a shifting aroma that spoke of distance and change, of boundaries crossed by scent alone. It was as if the forest itself breathed deeper now, aware of the dreaming tribe. Within its embrace, choosing not to intrude but to protect its limbs, stretched wide like a guardian cradling something sacred and ephemeral. The stars overhead had shifted, their positions subtly different than the night before, a reminder that nothing was still, not even the heavens. And Loma read them not as points of light, but as runes, constellations forming patterns that told her when to speak, when to keep silent, when to send the hunters, and when to gather roots. And tonight they whispered a change, of an approaching moment, wrapped in fog and uncertainty, a ripple in the steady rhythm of their days. And though she did not know its shape, she felt its presence like a stone pressed against the fabric of the future. Far within the sleeping pile of bodies, one man stirred not from discomfort, but from the pulse of a dream too vivid to remain contained. He sat up slowly, rubbing his eyes, his breath misting in the cool night air as he glanced at the fire, then at Luma, and though no words were exchanged, she nodded, understanding passing between them like water flowing over smooth stones. He rose and stepped quietly into the open night, guided by something unseen, perhaps the echo of a vision or the tug of ancestral longing that could only be answered beneath the open sky. He walked barefoot through the clearing, the soil cool and damp against his feet, each step a soft percussion in the nocturnal symphony of frogs, owls and rustling underbrush, his path lit not by torch or flame, but by the silver brush of moonlight filtering through the canopy in shafts that painted the world in contrast and shimmer. and he moved with reverence, not haste, as though every leaf deserved acknowledgement and every breeze a nod of recognition. At the edge of a cliff, he stopped, the land falling away before him into a vast stretch of forest, and valley bathed in moonlight, the sky above wide and unblinking, and he sat cross-legged, hands resting upon his knees, not in meditation as the modern world might call it, but in listening, in being allowing the pulse of the world to pass through him, to rearrange the pieces of his spirit into something more aligned with the rhythms that had existed long before language gave them names. Behind him, Luma remained at the fire, watching the stars, whispering now not to anyone near, but to those who had come before, their names spoken in the ancient way, with breath drawn deep and exhaled slowly, her words thin and ethereal, more vibration than sound, meant not to be heard by ears, but felt in the bones. And as the embers finally gave in to the ash, the warmth of the earth rose to take their place, holding the sleepers in its embrace as the long night reached its apex and began, ever so gently, to lean toward dawn. As the dusky hush of another stone-aged morning crept through the dense canopy above, casting a speckled mosaic of shadow and light across the mossy forest floor, the caveman began to stir, not all at once and not with the urgency of modern life, but in staggered rhythms that mirrored the soft sway of the trees or the distant chatter of a mountain stream, their bodies slow to rise from the comfort of gathered pelts and soft earth, as if the very soil held them in a gentle embrace. There was no alarm to sound, no schedule to dictate their rise, just the nudge of sunlight filtering through the woven branches above and the subtle, instinctual pull of hunger, of duty, of another day waiting, patiently like a familiar friend beyond the mouth of the cave, and so they emerged, stretching limbs weathered by generations of movement and survival, their backs arching like great cats greeting the day not with words but with breath, heavy and fogged in the morning chill. In this realm before clocks and calendars, the first order of any day was observation, listening for sounds that didn't belong, sniffing the air for changes in scent, watching the trees for movement that might whisper of predator or prey. And only once the world was deemed safe enough, only then did the tribe move on to the rituals of sustenance and survival, which they did not call by such names but simply lived out as breathing. The young among them, gangly-limbed and curious-eyed, had begun forming their own routines, mimicking the adults with both reverence and mischief, gathering pebbles they imagined were sacred, drawing in the dirt with sticks to create imagined maps of their world, or standing watch as if guarding an invisible herd, while nearby their elders scraped hides, repaired tools, or planned small journeys into deeper woods, all done with a slow deliberation that made time feel like a pliable thing, stretched thin and soft over the contours of the day. Midday brought with it the kind of warmth that made the ferns glisten with dew and the insects hum a little louder, and the cavemen, now spread out like threads of a tapestry woven across the land, found their rhythm in this stillness, not idling but working in a quiet, measured harmony, some gathering tubers and berries with the practiced eye of generations, others tracking faint footprints in the soil, testing their own skills as scouts, while the fire tender back at the cave nudged coals and bark with practiced fingers to maintain the ember heart of their world. And somewhere beyond the reach of immediate sight, an elder and a child walked together, the old man's fingers curled around a carved bone totem he claimed held the story of their origin, and the child listened not with questions but with wide silent eyes, absorbing each word and gesture, as if committing them to a scroll that lived only in memory. And their journey was not far but slow, a meandering dance through a forest dense with stories, each tree a sentinel, each breeze a whisper. By late afternoon, the sky had turned the color of damp clay, a soft gray stretching its arms overhead as if preparing the world for rest again, and the tribe returned gradually, each arrival marked not by loud greeting but by subtle signs, the dropping of foraged goods into communal baskets, the offering of meat to the fire, the quiet tapping of stones reshaped for Tuzand as the fire rose. So too did the soft hum of conversation, not words as we know them, but shared sounds and glances, the kind that stitched people together more tightly than language ever could. Their evening meal was not a feast by modern measures, but to them it was abundance, roasted roots with faint sweetness, the tempths of smoked fish, the texture of ground seeds, mashed with water into a paste spread thin over warmed rocks, and all of it shared in a circle where no one ate alone, and the act of eating was as sacred as any ritual, a binding of bellies and spirits under the gaze of the growing moon. As dusk deepened once more and the fire-esque glow painted their cave walls with gold and rust-red hues, the children gathered near the hearth, their eyes reflecting the flames, waiting, hoping for another story, another tale from before, and once again Luma, The elder, whose voice held the weight of generations, began to speak, her voice lower now, threaded with the gravity of things unsaid, and in her tale there were no heroes, only choices, and no beasts, only truths given animal form, and the tribe listened, not always understanding but always receiving, their minds drifting into the stories like rivers into the sea. When the tale ended, silence followed, not out of sleepiness but reverence, the kind that exists when something has been shared that cannot be repeated the same way again. And as they lay down once more in their circle of warmth and kinship, the stars watched from above, blinking slowly, patiently, like eyes that had seen this same ritual enacted for thousands of years. And the night grew deep, and the dreams that followed were not dreams at all, but memories from a time before memory, echoing quietly in the slow, steady breath of the sleeping tribe. As dawn crept across the edge of the world, a silent curtain of lavender and pale gold rising over the mountains, the gentle rustle of morning stirred the cavemen from their slumber, not with urgency, but with the slow and sacred rhythm of life that needed no clocks, no bells, only the turning earth, and the tender instincts of bodies shaped by nature's quiet law. The coals in the fire pit had died into whispers of heat, releasing faint spirals of smoke that wound themselves into the crisp air, and the furs where the tribe had laid still held the shapes of their resting forms, now emptying as they stirred, yawning and blinking, each person stretching slowly like tree roots awakening after a frost. Luma was the first to sit upright, her back a ridge of resilience and memory, her breath visible in the morning chill, her hands brushing gently over the earth as if greeting an old friend, and with a soft hum that echoed stories of sunrises past, she reached into a worn leather pouch and withdrew the sacred stones used for blessings, setting them out in the same pattern she had for countless seasons, honoring the continuation of time. The children awoke next, not with shouts or bursts of energy, but in a dreamy haze of blinking eyes and tousled hair, their small feet padding across the dew-slick stones, and they gathered near the ashes of last night's fire, as if drawn by the memory of warmth and story, by the imprint of Lomar's voice still echoing in the space between stars and waking. The men and women followed, some rubbing their arms, some leaning into gentle embraces, and their movements were coordinated without planning, shaped by years of instinct and shared practice, a communal ballet that flowed from cave to clearing, from fur to fire, as if everybody knew where it belonged even before its first breath of day. Taran, the quiet hunter with eyes like clouded ice, stepped beyond the camp's edge to greet the land, his breath misting before him, his silhouette merging with the dawnlight, and he bent to touch the soil, lifting a handful to his nose. Reading the night story written in sandfox, urine drying blood, the sharp tang of new sprouting grass, and he nodded to himself, reassured that no predators had passed too close. Behind him, Namel and her sister Anka prepared for foraging, wrapping leather around their feet and tying their hair with strips of bark, whispering small blessings to the morning as they chose baskets woven from reeds, their fingers tracing the symbols etched into the rim stories of successful harvests, of roots found in unlikely places, of berries shared on solstice nights. This morning, however, was not like all others, because today a scent lingered in the wind that no one could name, a blend of decay and sweetness like overripe fruit, cradled in the ribs of a long-dead beast stand. As the tribe quietly broke into their daily tasks, attention flickered just beneath their movements, an unspoken sense of change, hovering like a bird between wingbeat. Luma noticed it first, her nose wrinkling ever so slightly as she paused in her ritual, her fingers hovering above the sacred stones as if uncertain whether to complete the pattern, and she looked toward the horizon, her old eyes narrowing against the light, not in fear but in the deep recognition that something forgotten had begun to stir. Kren, the broad-shouldered stone napper, was sharpening a new blade with slow, circular motions, and though he said nothing, his hands moved with more pressure than usual, the edges more jagged than he intended, as if the stone itself was resisting his craft, mirroring his unease, the flint screaming under friction like a beast startled in sleep. The forest, usually full of birdsong by this hour, remained unnervingly quiet, the trees holding their breath, as if waiting for a verdict, and even the wind moved cautiously, threading its fingers gently through the tall grass without disturbing the balance of dew or leaf. Still, the tribe moved forward because that is what they always did, and by mid-morning they had spread across the surrounding land in pairs and threes, collecting roots, checking traps, hauling water from the stream, whose banks shimmered with the morning sun, the water cold and clear as polished bone. Aklo, the youngest of the warriors, stood watch on a stone outcropping overlooking the valley, his posture straight but his heart fluttering with unease, and when he turned his head, Scanning the distant line of trees, he thought he saw movement, but not the kind caused by deer, or wolves, or wind. This was different, to steady, to deliberate. He said nothing, choosing instead to stay alert, to observe longer, to trust the way his breath caught in his throat like a warning cold tight within him, and from his vantage point he could see the entire stretch of land. The tribe called home, from the sacred stone ring to the bone totems that marked their southern border. Far below, the river sparkled like a serpent's scales, winding lazily between hills carved by time and rain, its waters whispering old songs to the stones that lined its path. And even now, with tension lingering, its sound brought a kind of calm, the eternal lullaby of nature, indifferent and constant. Back in camp, Luma completed her ritual, placing the final stone with a sigh that seemed to carry more than breath, perhaps, a memory perhaps, as the sun climbed higher, painting the world in brighter shades. The tribe slowly forgot the scent on the wind, the quiet in the trees, the strange movement in the forest, choosing instead to focus on the rhythm of now, the certainty of task and togetherness. But deep beneath the surface of their minds, in the place where dreams formed and ancient fears slumbered, something had shifted, and though no one spoke of it, every step felt a fraction heavier, every breath a note higher in pitch, as if the earth had tilted ever so slightly, nudging them toward a path yet unseen. The day would pass, as all days did, with its own heartbeat, its own subtle story written across stone and sky, but the echo of change had begun, and no sacred circle, no foraged route, no quiet fire would stop what now slowly approached across the veil of the horizon. As the soft light of morning crept timidly over the curved horizon, gently painting the sleeping earth with hues of faint gold and pale lavender, the tribe's resting forms began to stir beneath the woven furs and skins that had held their warmth through the night, their breath forming tiny clouds in the crisp air, while the fire's final embers whispered farewell to the darkness. And lo, Maver, the first to rise, opened her eyes to a world caught momentarily between dream and day, where silence reigned not as absence, but as a quiet acknowledgement of the sacred stillness that preceded every dawn. And as the sun slowly ascended its path above the canopy of gently swaying trees, casting dappled light across the forest floor where ancient roots sprawled like sleeping serpents and morning dew clung to every surface like forgotten tears of the night, the cavemen moved with practiced purpose through the awakening world, their bodies attuned to every whisper of wind and crackle of leaf, following invisible trails left behind by beasts both timid and bold, while the rhythm of their footfalls merged with the heartbeat of the earth itself, each step a quiet testament to their deep, unspoken bond with the landscape that had shaped them. As dawn crept once again over the distant cliffs and the early light scattered across the uneven ground in soft fragments, filtered by the swaying boughs of ancient trees that had stood through unnumbered generations of such mornings, the tribe stirred slowly from the warmth of their communal slumber, emerging like small, blinking creatures from the furred comfort of their shared dreams, their bodies cocooned in memories of warmth, hunger, laughter, and the long-lingering cadence of Luma's voice. They stretched, not hurriedly but instinctively, a collective ritual passed on not through conscious repetition but by the way their bones knew to rise when light hit skin, and as their joints creaked and muscles rippled under skin that smelled of earth and smoke, the sense of continuity of having woken this same way 1,000 times and 1,000 forgotten yesterdays settled quietly into the morning fog. Children yawned with wide-open mouths, the kind of innocent yawns that seemed to pull the very sky inward, while the adults quietly checked the embers, stirred the ashes, and coaxed small flames back into being with the same reverence. Others might give to prayers because fire was life, warmth, and memory all at once, a heartbeat of survival that demanded patience and rewarded devotion. Today would not be a day of hunting or ceremony, but one of movement, for the clan had sensed, in the shifting winds and distant echoes, that it was time to seek new grounds, where berries had not been picked clean, where game had not been scared away, and where the sky might offer fresher breezes. So the preparation began like the soft prelude of a long, slow song. The elder hunters examined the horizon with narrowed eyes, noting the migration of birds overhead, the change in scents carried on the breeze, and the dryness in the soil beneath their feet, signs that others might ignore. But to them were loud and unmistakable whispers from the land itself, as if the earth was saying, "Move." Baskets were filled with essentials, not just food, but the small talismanic objects that each family line held dear. A shard of red ochre used by an ancestor, a carved bone with a spiral etched into its center, a smoothed pebble that once brought good luck during a long winter, tokens of identity and story that would accompany them wherever they went. Bridging the distance between places and people, they walked, when the time came, not in a rushed or scattered fashion, but in a long, weaving ribbon through the forest paths and over wide, wind-swept hills, the sound of their movement muted by thick moss and dry leaves underfoot, while above them the branches formed a kind of protective lattice that filtered sunlight into soft dapples across their backs. Conversation was minimal not because they were not social, but because walking demanded listening, to the sound of water nearby, to the chatter of squirrels or sudden silences that might mean danger, to the whispers of wind that spoke of changing weather, and to their own breath, a reminder of life in motion. Children were carried by strong arms or walked holding fingers and palms, their small feet padding rhythmically in imitation of elders, and though they complained at times, they too understood in a wordless way that walking together was not a burden, but a ritual, a shared choreography between body, earth, and the invisible threads of past generations who had walked this way before. At midday they stopped in a clearing, where a fallen tree offered rest and insects buzzed in a golden haze of sunlight, and here they shared what food they had: dried meat, roots, the sweet, slightly fermented berries gathered days before, and drank deeply from a nearby stream, its cold clarity drawing satisfied sighs and wet chins from those who cupped it in their hands. Then came a moment of stillness, not sleep, but a resting pause, where some lay flat on warm stones, while others hummed low tunes, without words, a sound as old as breath itself, meant to calm the heart, lull the mind, and stretch the moment like leather pulled taut over a frame. As the journey resumed, the terrain changed, from soft forested shelter to a more open stretch of rocky land, where wind moved, freely tugging at hair and pelts, and where the sky seemed larger, heavier, almost sentient, watching them from above with a cool detachment like some eternal spectator to their fleeting march. Here the pace slowed, not from fatigue but out of caution, for open spaces made them visible, and visibility could bring predators four-legged or two-hand, so the group shifted, instinctively drawing tighter together, forming a protective shell around the most vulnerable among them. They walked this way until the sun dipped toward the horizon again, painting everything in amber and soft gold, and when they finally paused again, it was by a cluster of rocks near a river bend, a place familiar and new all at once, suitable for shelter and rich with potential stories waiting to be discovered. Tents were not raised but formed from instinctive arrangements, pelts stretched over branches, stones positioned to break wind, and soft grasses layered for comfort, and as they settled in, the soundscape shifted from footsteps and whispers to crackling fires, bubbling laughter, and the melodic repetition of old tasks done in new spaces. A woman carved a bone into a fishhook, her movements slow and rhythmic, while beside her a child mimicked the gesture with a twig, not for utility, but for learning, and farther back, two young men tested their strength by lifting stones and laughing at their failures, though beneath the laughter lay a quiet competition, a testing of adulthood. Another gathered wild onions with deliberate fingers, pressing each one gently to her nose, before placing it into a bark basket, while her mate scraped dried resin from a tree, knowing it would serve later as both glue and medicine depending on need. Resources were never singular in their purpose, and knowing their many uses was the mark of wisdom. Night fell without ceremony, descending like a thick blanket pulled over the world, and with it came the songs, not stories this time, but low, slow chants sung in unison, meant not to entertain but to anchor, to remind each other that they were still connected, still safe, still real within the darkness. A new elder began a song that had no real beginning, a cyclical melody that wound back on itself like vines around a tree trunk, and others joined in without hesitation, weaving their voices into the air like smoke, letting the tones ripple outward into the night, until even the insects seemed to quiet and listen. When sleep finally came, it was not sudden but slow, a creeping surrender of body to gravity, of mind to memory, of heart to belonging, and the last sound many heard before dreams took them was not the chirp of birds or rustle of leaves, but the soft, steady breath of those beside them, rising and falling like waves on an unseen shore. And so the cycle continued, the days of movement and stillness of story and silence of hunger and fulfillment of danger and safety, woven together into a tapestry not written in books or etched in stone, but lived, breathed, and remembered in the marrow of their bones and the warmth of their fires. They did not name their history nor separate it from the present, for to them the passage of time was not a line but a circle, and every sunrise was both a new beginning and the continuation of something much older, something that pulsed quietly beneath every step they took. In the distant hills wolves howled, a sound both familiar and cautionary, but the tribe did not stir, for their circle was strong, their fire steady, and their dreams deep, and in those dreams the world was not made of fear or loss, but of echoes of whispers, of long walks and longer songs, and of the simple, enduring truth that together they endured. As dawn crept slowly over the horizon like a shy animal peeking from behind tall grass, the soft golden light stretched over the dewy foliage and dust-covered stones, gently waking the slumbering world of the tribe that had survived yet another day through instinct, unity, and an unspoken trust in the rhythm of the earth, a rhythm pulsing through their veins with every heartbeat, every breath, and every silent glance exchanged around last night's fire. The morning was not loud or abrupt. It was subtle and tender, as though even the sun respected the fragile dreams still clinging to the heavy eyelids of those sprawled on fur and dried leaves. Their bodies curled close to the warmth of one another and the fading embers of Lomar's story, whose echoes lingered like an invisible mist in the space between the waking and the dream. Birdsong returned slowly, tentative at first, then bolder, weaving through the canopy like melodic vines, each chirp and trill part of a natural orchestra that had once guided their ancestors, and would one day guide their descendants. And the children, those bright-eyed shadows of tomorrow, were the first to stir, drawn by the magic of morning dew and the curiosity that thrived in fresh sunlight. Luma herself lay still but aware, her senses sharper than most, attuned to the sounds and smells of the new day. The subtle shift in temperature, the whisper of movement in nearby underbrush, and the sacred feeling in her chest that told her this day, like all others, was a gift wrapped in the simplicity of survival and the poetry of continuity. She rose not with effort but with purpose, her body responding to the call of day. Like a tree rising toward the sun, and she moved among the tribe, with a grace earned over seasons of watching, listening, and remembering her fingers, brushing shoulders and brows as if anointing each soul with silent blessing. Breakfast was never rushed, never loud. It was an act of reverence. The sharing of nuts, roots, and dried meat passed from hand to hand in quiet communion. The fire rekindled not just to cook, but to continue its vigil, for fire was the tribe's heartbeat, their sentinel, their storyteller when words failed or dreams needed fuel. And so they sat in their loose circle, limbs folded and minds waking, not speaking much, but communicating volumes in the shared rhythm of chewing, in the tilt of a head or the twitch of a brow, in the way the eldest passed the last bite to the youngest and the strongest offered the choicest scrap to the most frail. This morning, after the meal and the stretching of limbs and the ritual of rubbing soil into hands, for strength the tribe moved slowly toward the shallow creek that wound like a silver snake through their familiar clearing, and there they washed, not just their bodies but their spirits too, letting the cold, clear water carry away the ghosts of worry, the weight of dreams, and the dust of yesterday. Children splashed with more glee than grace, their giggles rising like steam into the crisp air, and the adults, though more reserved, could not help the smiles that tugged at their lips. For joy was not forbidden, here it was necessary, a survival tool as vital as any stone tool or fire spark. Luma watched it all from a stone perch near the water's edge, her eyes squinting against the rising sun as she traced the motion of a heron lifting into flight, its wide wings casting momentary shade over the giggling heads below. And in that shade she saw the shape of time, how it moved forward always, even when one stood still. By mid-morning, the tasks of the day began not by command but by rhythm, each member of the tribe gravitating toward what needed doing, not with resentment but with a calm understanding that survival was shared, not assigned. And so one pair moved toward the woods for kindling, another to the southern ridge to check the traps laid the night before, and others stayed near to mend furs, grind roots, or simply tend to the children. Today's rhythm was gentler than others. There were no storms to prepare for, no wounded to care for, no hunts looming on the horizon, just the steady maintenance of life, which in its quiet, repetitive nature offered its own form of meaning, like a drumbeat too deep to hear but too powerful to ignore. And even as hands busied themselves with bone tools and weaving reeds, minds drifted, to dreams had and dreams to come, to memories of loved ones long gone, to stories whispered beside fires that etched meaning into the stars. And Luma, ever the silent observer, gathered those drifting thoughts into the folds of her awareness, weaving them into new stories she would one day share. By noon the sun stood high and proud above the canopy, its rays filtering through layers of leaves and casting flickering patterns on the tribe below. And it was then that they paused, as if instructed by the sky itself, to rest, to recline on warmed stones or cool furs, their bodies surrendering to stillness not out of exhaustion, but because nature had called a brief truce with movement. This sacred pause was filled not with chatter but with breath, with the slow rhythm of lungs syncing with the rustle of wind and the buzz of insects, and in that collective silence, the tribe found a strange kind of communion, not with each other alone, but with the earth itself, as if the soil beneath their spines remembered their ancestors and whispered blessings into their skin. When movement returned, it was again unhurried, a dance of intent and energy shared, and now the younger ones followed the elders to the teaching circle, an open space where stories, not lessons, shaped the minds of the next generation. And today it was Oru, the lean hunter with a scar that split his brow like a dry riverbed, who spoke of tracking with eyes, not feet. He told of how the wind carries scent, how leaves speak when stepped upon, how animals leave behind more than footprints. And as he spoke, his body mimicked the forms of fox and fawn, and the children watched wide-eyed, some mimicking him, others lost in visions of becoming the hunter, the fox, the fawn, all at once. Luma, sitting at the edge, nodded to herself, not because she agreed or disagreed, but because she saw the knowledge transfer like flame from stick to stick, unbroken, undiminished, and that was all she had ever hoped for. As the sun bent toward the west and shadows lengthened into quiet warnings of coming dark, the gatherers returned with berries, roots, and a single duck, its neck broken clean, its feathers plucked with care, and the meal that followed was both feast and ritual. The duck roasted on a spit while roots simmered in stone pots, the smell a heady perfume of survival and satisfaction. They ate again in silence, not out of restraint but respect, chewing slowly, each bite a benediction, each swallow a hymn. And after the meal, as twilight painted the sky in watercolor blues and rose, they turned again to the fire, not for food or light alone, but for presence. And there, once again, Luma rose, not because she had planned to, but because the moment called her, and moments had always been her true guide. She stood in the glow of flame and shadow, her form flickering like memory itself, and she began another story, not one of hunts or beasts, but of a dream she once had, where the stars fell like rain and turned into birds, where mountains walked and rivers sang names, and her voice, aged yet unbroken, carried them all to that dreamscape. And so the tribe listened, not with ears alone, but with skin, with hearts, with memory, as the fire crackled, as the stars blinked alive, as another day folded gently into the sacred vault of time, as dawn gently peeled away the night's hush, and a cool breath of wind rolled down from the distant hills, stirring the soft tips of dewy grass and brushing past the half-buried stones that lined the outer edge of the tribal clearing. The first of the tribe's stirring breaths rose like ghostly wisps toward the slowly brightening sky, and in those tender blue-tinged hours before the sun fully emerged from behind the horizon, the rhythm of early life resumed its quiet, instinctive beat, with rustlings of furs, yawns that stretched beyond lips into shoulders, and the low grunts of acknowledgement shared between sleepers now waking, all wrapped within the warmth of communal safety. Their fire, which had faded into a soft mound of glowing embers, crackled faintly as a piece of half-burnt wood collapsed inward, sending a small spire of golden sparks upward to vanish against the indigo morning. And this quiet display seemed to beckon the elders from their dreams, prompting a slow rise from bedding woven with reeds, feathers, and animal hides, their joints creaking with the stiffness of age, and their eyes blinking against the slow creep of daylight filtering through the canopy above. The scent of night remained in the air, tinged with moisture and the faint musk of sleeping bodies, yet was soon overtaken by the earthy aroma of freshly disturbed soil, as a few early risers padded softly toward the edge of the camp to relieve themselves, moving with the silent efficiency of those whose lives depended on being unnoticed by predators, while others gathered dried leaves, brittle bark, and strips of moss to coax the fire back into full flame. Children stirred lest their bodies coiled beneath furs, clinging to the remnants of their dreams, some murmuring unintelligible things in sleep, while others woke with soft whines, clutching at the arms of older siblings or mothers already half awake beside them, and when they sat up, blinking, rubbing eyes with fists still plump with baby fat, the first real sounds of the day emerged: laughter, coughs, a bark of recognition from a nearby dog, and the sharp crack of a twig underfoot. Breakfast, as always, was meager but satisfying: dried roots softened in hot water, a handful of berry mash scooped into wide leaves, strips of smoked fish pulled from a communal pouch and passed hand to hand until none remained, and, once hunger had been tamed, minds turned slowly to the business of the day, repairing a broken tool, preparing hunting gear, reweaving a fraying sling, or simply tending to the needs of the youngest who clung to legs and sleeves like vines. Among them one figure moved with a different purpose: Markor, the lean tracker whose silence spoke of knowledge etched deep into bone and blood, whose eyes sharp as talon tips missed little, and who now stood at the edge of the clearing with knees slightly bent, one palm pressed against the earth, his head tilted in quiet communion with the ground, listening for what others could not hear. The far-off thrum of herds or the echo of distant footfalls. He rose without a word and turned toward the elders, his look alone a signal, and they came together quickly, drawn by instinct and urgency, forming a crescent in the dust as Emcor gestured subtly toward the east, where the sun had begun to show its golden rim above the hills, and spoke in low tones of signs, fresh droppings, the faint trail of hooves, broken stems that hinted at the movement of bison, not far from their position. This news stirred a quiet excitement, for bison meant meat, hide, bone, and tendon a bounty, if taken with skill and care, and, within moments, preparations began with the brisk, solemn focus of those for whom survival was not abstract but immediate and sacred, each hand moving with practiced speed, spears sharpened, ropes tested, stones fitted into slings, and paint daubed upon faces in quiet rituals of focus and strength. Children were corralled toward the center of camp under the watchful eyes of those too old or too young to hunt, while the hunters at and all, including McCaw, gathered near the fire, crouched low, speaking in terms of wind direction, terrain, and strategy, their words falling like pebbles into a still pond, rippling outward into action. Soon they vanished into the trees, a shadowy procession weaving through trunks and underbrush with the elegance of a single organism, feet falling in patterns shaped by countless generations, and the forest, briefly disturbed, closed behind them with a sigh, leaving the camp to wait, to hope, and to pray in silence beneath the rising sun. And as the seasons turned slowly like the grinding stones worn smooth by time and tradition, the tribe found themselves returning once more to the banks of the slow-moving river, their bare feet padding upon the now familiar paths, pressed into the earth by generations of wanderers before them. And with each step taken toward the place they had once known as home, they carried not just memories of long hunts and whispered tales beneath starry skies, but also the deep and quiet understanding that they were now the fire-bearers, the ones who held in their bones the warmth of countless yesterdays and the spark for endless tomorrows. The children, taller now, stronger in limb and confidence, carried baskets woven from reeds and filled with the last roots of autumn, while the elders, slower in gait but still sharp in eye, traced the edge of the horizon with an unspoken knowing, sensing the shifts of birds in the air, the patterns of cloud shadows on the ground, and the message of wind slipping through tall grasses. And amid them all was Luma, seated upon a stone polished smooth by use and time, her gaze turned not outward, but inward, remembering, always remembering. The camp was built anew, not as it had been, but as it had become, a blend of tradition and learning, of inherited rituals and newly tested ones, with stones stacked in circles where fire would once again dance, and furs stretched and cured by younger hands that had watched carefully, patiently, and now took their place as stewards of warmth and wisdom. And when the first night fell in this reborn home, it did so not with fear or uncertainty, but with calm, for the tribe had become one with their rhythm, a melody hummed by the earth and echoed by the stars. That evening, around the glow of fresh flames, they gathered as they had always done, and Luma, though her voice now thinner and her breaths more fragile, began to speak not of old hunts or mystical beasts, but of the people themselves, of the quiet victories and tender losses, of the way hands found hands in darkness and hearts beat in tandem, even when the cold bit deep and her tale, simple in its weaving, was made rich by the knowing nods and silent tears of those who had lived it. She spoke of how the elk had always stood not as prey but as symbol, how the stars were not just light but guidance, and how the earth beneath them was never just ground, but the skin of something ancient that listened and remembered. And as her words floated into the night, the flames leaned toward her as if drawn by the gravity of her truth-casting, her shadow large and flickering on the cave walls behind her like a spirit larger than life itself. And when at last her voice gave way to silence, the tribe did not move to fill it. Instead, they sat in the hush, letting it wrap around them like another layer of fur, breathing in the smoke, the memory, the meaning, and somewhere in that stillness, where time folded in on itself and the ancient met the now, they felt it, the unity, the legacy, the simple miracle of still being. That night, as sleep came, it came not as escape but as embrace, and their dreams were gentle, carried not on winds of fear but on the lull of belonging, the slow exhale of a people who knew their place in the turning of things. And the fire, though reduced to glowing embers, remained alive, fed not by wood alone, but by memory and meaning and the quiet, enduring bond of story. The tribe would rise again in the morning. They always did, and the sun would spill like honey across the hills, and the children would laugh, and the hunters would stretch, and Loomis Stone would sit quietly beside the fire circle, now cool and empty but echoing still with the last of her words, the soundless imprint of a life lived in deep connection. And so, with the final whispers of the wind and the gentle hush of dawn breaking once more, the story of this ancient tribe, their fears, their fires, their futures slipped softly into the eternal rhythm of the earth's long sleep. If you enjoyed this journey through time and silence, please subscribe to Boring Historian Sleepy, like this video, share it with a fellow restless mind, and comment what era you'd like to sleep through next. This channel will upload long, calming, and deeply boring sleep-inducing history stories daily, just for you. Good night, traveler of time. In the vast stretches of time before cities rose and machines buzzed, before names were written in books and history was tracked on timelines, there existed a world untouched by clocks or schedules. This was the world of our earliest ancestors, commonly referred to as cavemen. Though the term caveman is a simplification, evoking images of rugged individuals wrapped in animal skins crouching near fires inside caves, it paints a general picture of early humans living close to the earth, guided not by deadlines but by daylight, hunger, and weather. Life was slow, repetitive, and grounded, filled with small tasks that were, in their own way, essential, even sacred. Let us now wander into this distant, quiet world, and imagine how a day may have passed in the life of a typical prehistoric human. A day in the Stone Age began not with alarm clocks or urgent schedules, but with the subtle cues of the natural world. As dawn approached, the first rays of sunlight filtered gently into cave entrances or makeshift huts, casting long shadows on rough stone walls and packed dirt floors. The people stirred slowly, awakening not out of stress but in tune with the rising sun. Birds called to one another in the trees above, and the wind rustled the leaves softly, whispering the beginning of another day. Some might have awakened to the sounds of nearby water trickling or the coals of last night's fire crackling back to life as they stirred the embers into a faint glow. They rose from their sleeping spots, clumps of grass, animal hides, or cool stone to begin another simple day, as their ancestors had done before them. The earliest moments of the morning were spent in silence or with hushed voices. There were no loud conversations, no breaking news, no busy kitchens. Breakfast, if it could be called that, was a modest affair. Depending on what was available, one might chew on dried berries collected the day before, or gnaw on the sinewy remains of last night's catch. If luck had been with the group recently, there might be leftover roasted roots, the taste earthy and mildly sweet, or a morsel of meat preserved by the smoke of the fire. There was no salt or spice, no sugar or sauce, just nourishment in its most basic form. Some would take this time to sit quietly, watching the sun rise higher, listening to the gentle sounds of others stirring around them, or checking their surroundings for signs of animal movement or weather changes. These people, while unschooled in written knowledge, were keen observers of the world around them. As the sun crested and bathed the land in a golden light, the small group, perhaps a family or a loose band of families, began to separate for their daily tasks. The division of labor was fluid, shaped more by need and skill than by rigid roles. Some of the stronger members, often men but not exclusively, would head off with tools in hand, long wooden spears tipped with stone, sharpened rocks, or even simple clubs. Their goal was to hunt, though success was never guaranteed. Hunting required patience, stealth, and knowledge of the land. They followed animal trails etched in the earth, tracked droppings, and noted broken branches that might signal where a deer or boar had passed. Sometimes, they set traps or coordinated in small teams to corral an animal, using simple gestures and quiet signals. Hours could pass in silence as they waited motionless in tall grass or behind boulders, eyes squinting under the sunlight, every sound, every movement analyzed with primal precision. Back at the camp or near the cave, others busied themselves with equally important work. The gatherers, often women, children, or elders, ventured out with baskets woven from grass or bark, moving through the forests and meadows in search of roots, tubers, berries, edible leaves, and even insects. They knew which plants could heal and which could harm. They dug carefully into the earth with flat stones or sticks, loosening soil around bulbs and lifting them gently. Mushrooms were observed with caution. Some were known for their bitterness, others avoided altogether for the memories of illness they once caused. Children followed close behind, learning as they watched. Sometimes they mimicked their elders, reaching eagerly toward bright berries or crouching to examine a trail of ants. Though young, they were not idle. Learning was hands-on, woven into every task of the day. For those who stayed behind, the day involved other responsibilities. The making and repairing of tools was never-ending. A good spearhead might chip or crack during a hunt, and so, sitting beneath trees or beside the fire, individuals worked patiently. They selected stones carefully, often flint or obsidian, then struck them at precise angles to shape blades, points, or scrapers. The sound of stone tapping stone was rhythmic and meditative. Beside them, others might be weaving fibers into nets or ropes, tanning hides by soaking them in water and scraping them with tools. Bone needles, sharpened carefully, helped in sewing together pieces of animal skin to make coverings against the cold. The work was repetitive, slow, and not always successful, but it was necessary and done with quiet concentration. The middle of the day might bring a short pause. If the sun was harsh, or if work was tiring, the people would rest. They might gather under a tree or find shade inside the cave, sharing what little food they had on hand. Conversation, when it happened, was simple. Words passed slowly. Gestures did much of the speaking. Language, though not complex, was functional and expressive. A grunt, a glance, a wave of the hand could carry entire thoughts. After rest, the work resumed, but without urgency. There were no deadlines. Only the coming of night reminded them that the time to gather or hunt was limited. If hunters returned successful, the camp would prepare for the evening meal. A fresh kill meant excitement, satisfaction, even celebration. The meat would be shared, bones cracked open for marrow, skins stripped for later use. A fire would be built up, smoke rising in steady columns as flames licked at the meat roasting on wooden skewers or stones. The smell filled the air, mingling with the earthy scent of the forest and the warmth of bodies seated near one another. Those who had stayed behind would ask, perhaps not with words, but with curiosity about the hunt. Hunters might pantomime the chase, the final strike, the animal's fall. These were stories, told not in writing but in motion and memory. As dusk settled in and the sun melted into the horizon, the mood softened. The sky deepened from blue to purple to black, stars appearing one by one, bright and sharp without city lights to hide them. This was a time for quiet reflection. Children curled close to their parents, full bellies making them sleepy. Elders leaned against the cave walls or lay beside the fire, eyes half closed, listening to the night. Sometimes, someone would sing not loudly, but softly, in a voice that rose and fell like a breeze. The melodies were simple, made up on the spot or remembered from long ago. They were not for performance, but for presence, a way to end the day gently. If a story was told, it was not just for entertainment. It was for passing down knowledge about animals, about places, about dangers or dreams. When sleep came, it came naturally. There were no beds, but there was comfort. Bodies huddled together for warmth, wrapped in skins, lying close to the fire or inside the shelter of the cave. The sounds of the forest, outside crickets, the wind, perhaps the distant howl of a wolf did not disturb them. It was simply part of the world. The fire crackled softly, glowing orange against the stone. The night was long, but not feared. It was respected, a time to rest and prepare for another day. This life, though harsh in many ways, was not lived with haste. Cavemen did not measure their days by minutes. They measured them by the tasks done, the food gathered, the stories told, and the fire that continued to burn through the night. Their concerns were immediate survival, safety, warmth, but within that simplicity was a kind of peace, a rhythm, a balance. Every action had meaning, no matter how small. They did not seek endless growth or wealth or recognition. They simply existed, day by day, in tune with the world around them. So when we ask, what did cavemen actually do all day? The answer is, they lived. They rose with the sun and slept beneath the stars. They hunted, gathered, cooked, and crafted. They raised children and buried their dead. They told stories and made tools. They built nothing grand, left no cities behind, but they passed on knowledge, learned through doing, and carved symbols on cave walls to speak across time. They lived with the earth, not against it, and moved through their days with a kind of quiet purpose that modern life often forgets. In imagining their world, we can find stillness, we can slow down, we can remember a time when the most important thing was not the hour of the day, but the warmth of the fire and the safety of the group. And as we drift towards sleep, we can let go of the noise and pressure of the present, and instead, settle into the simplicity of the past. The fire flickers, the wind whispers through the trees, and in the cave the people sleep.